Call this workshop regarding our budget to order. It is Thursday, June 27th of 2024. The time is 5:30 p.m. Mr. Vino, please call the roll.
Mr. Prather, Mr. Scott, Ms. Garza, Mayor Houston,
Here.
Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Gleason, and
Mr.
Mr.
Gleason?
Here?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Mendoza.
Yeah, I
We
said
have a
here.
quorum present.
Yeah, you were still muted. Okay. First is citizen comment time period. However, did anyone sign up? Then we will go straight into our presentation. Ms. Trevino.
Receive a staff presentation, hold discussion regarding the fiscal year 2023-2024 financial update and preliminary fiscal year 2024-2025 budget, and provide direction to the city manager.
Ms. Reyes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Today, we are providing an update on the budget process and a timeline of next steps. The process began with City Council and
Is your mic-
directors.
Are you muted on your screen? Is Joe and Rodney muted on their screens? Okay.
Sorry about that. So let's start over. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Today, we are providing an update on the budget process and a timeline of next steps. This process began with City Council and directors coming together at your visioning session in January to discuss our strategic plan and develop priorities for the next year, continued with the budget policy workshop in February, approval of the budget policy in March, and a budget work session in May. Over the past few months, our team has collaborated to critically examine our needs, communicate the challenges that all departments are faced with, and work in coordination with one another to identify priority projects and positions. We are in a fiscally tight year, and our staff has had to work leaner in order to meet the needs and demands of our growing community. We recognize that the same cost drivers and inflation affecting city operations are also affecting our residents. So once again, we used a zero increase budget approach. In addition, we continue to seek state and federal grant funding to assist in offsetting further strain on our current taxpayers. Our thoughtful deliberation throughout this year's budget process has allowed us to identify ways to develop a budget that reflects a holistic operational approach, incrementally moves us to a more financially stable position, and anticipates needs and constraints for future budgets. Building a budget is a dynamic process and involves many moving pieces. We received preliminary property tax rolls in May and are expecting final numbers near the end of July. Although there is an increase, the presentation will highlight a couple of reasons why it is a little lower than first anticipated. That being said, we need increased property tax revenue to offset volatility in sales tax. We continue to strive to diversify our tax base, focusing on commercial and industrial development and mixed housing projects in order to shield residents from property tax rate increases. This year, I want to continue to focus on our greatest asset, our people, as well as planning for our future. In 2022, we completed an employee engagement survey that asked our organization about benefits, pay, and professional development opportunities. Since then, we completed the classification and compensation study, and council approved our compensation philosophy. In May, we surveyed employees again, and the results showed increased satisfaction from our employees towards their salaries, benefits, and opportunities for professional development compared to when we polled them in 2022. In addition, we have fewer vacancies than we have had in years past, which demonstrates we are more effective in our recruitment and retention efforts. People want to be here. That is something that has been demonstrated time and time again through the recruitment efforts that we've recently gone through, most notably our assistant city manager positions. We had over 200 applicants among both assistant city manager positions. So, and the pool was very, very deep in terms of the level of experience And in fact, this is Mr. Gonzalez's first meeting with us officially as Assistant City Manager, so want to welcome him. We continue to diligently monitor 2024 revenues and expenses as we forecast for 2025, and we have decreased operational expenses in order to account for decreasing sales tax revenue. We also postponed most of our capital outlay purchases. That's for equipment and things like that. That would be like one-time purchases, and we also implemented a managed hiring process. And it wasn't a freeze, but it was a review process so that when positions become vacant, then we're able to look at them more diligently to see, okay, is it a critical position that needs to be filled? As they developed their budget for fiscal year '25, departments were also tasked with holding their operating budgets at or below what they had in fiscal year 2024. Public safety staffing continues to be a priority, and any additional financial capacity will be set aside in advance for that effort. In addition, the added demand to keep our utility rates low and rising costs has whittled away at our utility reserve funds, and we must ensure we remain in a sound financial situation. We must take a multi-year outlook as we plan for the future. We're continuing to seek increased public engagement throughout the budget process. This has included live streaming the council visiting session, videos featuring our budget staff, highlighting public engagement opportunities throughout the process. We have also presented both the budget and CIP to the Neighborhood Commission earlier in the spring, and will make presentations to the Neighborhood Commission and Citizens Utility Advisory Board in the coming months. I would like to thank Director of Finance, John Locke, the budget team, and our leadership team for all of their hard work in developing next year's budget while carefully navigating our current financial situation. I also want to thank Mayor and Council for your time and commitment to our beloved community, and also by giving us strong support and very concise and consistent direction. I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Locke to provide tonight's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes, Mayor and City Council. Tonight, we're going to go over and review a draft budget for all of the major operating funds. We'll begin with the general fund, and we'll look at some revenue estimates, some of the cost drivers that are going to impact next year's budget, go over what available capacity there might be, and then there will be some decision points where we have some decisions that we would like council to address this evening. And we'll also do that for all the remaining major operating funds. Just as an introduction, some of this information Ms. Reyes went over in her opening remarks. But as I mentioned, we're going to provide a draft budget of all the major operating funds. We've discussed sales tax a lot and how it's impacting not just this fiscal year, but next fiscal year as well. The preliminary tax roll has been received, and the certified rolls should be received by July 25th. There are multiple items that are impacting our taxable value in fiscal year 25. There's a pattern of cyclical growth that we're going to go over, a new circuit breaker legislation that has really impacted our revenues in fiscal year 25. And there are a couple of properties that Texas State purchased that'll be off of the tax roll next year that will also impact the general fund's operating budget. Just wanted to go over some additional opportunities for citizen comment. We've already been at the Neighborhood Commission. We're going to go back on August 21st. And after we deliver the budget to City Council, we're going to share that same information with the Neighborhood Commission. And then there will be 4 public hearings in September, 2 on the budget and 2 on the tax rate. The Citizen Utility Advisory Board will review the utility rates and make a recommendation to City Council. And this budget is supporting the employee compensation philosophy. So it includes the authorized 3 to 5% increase of personnel costs as authorized by the budget policy. At the beginning of the process, at visioning, City Council refined the strategic goals. So as we make our way through the budget process, every service or every program needs to point back to one of these 5 strategic goals that City Council set. We'll begin with just going over the employee compensation philosophy. And as Ms. Reyes mentioned, there's an emphasis on and a continued commitment to employees with this budget. The classification and compensation study has been completed and implemented, and City Council approved the compensation philosophy. A survey was done, and this chart, it's kind of hard to see, so I'll call out exactly what it is, compares the results of 2024 to 2022, and you can see a dramatic positive shift in employee perception as it relates to compensation. What these answers are the sum of somewhat agree and strongly agree responses. So the question is, the compensation I receive motivates me to perform at higher levels. In 2022, 33% agreed, and in 2024, 60% agreed. And the next question is, my salary reflects my responsibilities. In 2022, 33% agreed, and in 2024, 61% agreed. So that's a dramatic increase on both of those responses, and it shows the impact that the implementation of the compensation study has had on employees' perception of their compensation.
Can you hold up just a second? Mr. Scott, is this a question we need to have right this minute, or can we wait till the end to ask?
Hold on, shoot. So,
What is your question?
I'm trying to get to it. Hold on.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go. Well, my question is the way you asked the questions for the evaluations. It seems sort of leading to me. I mean, anybody's going to say that they're going to do better if you give them more money, and that's basically what you're saying. And I just, data analysis is something I really like, and that just seems like it's a little leading to me personally. I don't know if you have a real true vision of what the employees really feel if they didn't get a raise, if that was get the same results. That's all.
Well, it may have helped to provide the additional background that the responses.
Hold
and
on a second. Let's see who's got audio on.
I have this audio
You'll check.
on.
Mr. Prather, yours should be on mute. Okay.
Okay. For each question, the employee had the option of selecting strongly disagree, I think neutral, somewhat agree, and strongly agree. So there were multiple options that the employee could select on whether or not they agree with that statement.
I think the point is that the questions were asked in 2022. Nobody knew what their pay was going to be, and the questions are being asked again. So it's another slice in time, and because of things that happened in between, but I don't think that that was causal on the answers.
So Polco worked with us originally when we did the first employee engagement survey, and Polco is a national survey company, so that's who we worked with to craft the questions.
Yeah.
And so then, you're exactly right, we pulsed where we were, and we
Right.
polled workers, employees, about where we were in 2022 at that snapshot in time, and now
Right.
asked the same question
Right.
in the same exact way, and then they provided their response accordingly. So I appreciate where Mr. Scott's coming from, because I agree, yes, sometimes a question can influence how somebody answers, but we
Right.
asked the same question in 2022 as we asked in 2024 and got different responses. As you can see there, the blue bar is 2022 and the red bar is 2024.
Yeah. Okay, counsel, if some of these, if you could hold your question, unless it's just really critical, but if you're going to hold your question, keep the slide number written down next to your question, and that'll be helpful.
Okay.
Please continue, Mr. Locke.
This is another slide that shows the implementation of the compensation study has had a positive impact on employees. This shows the employee vacancy rate, And so what it shows, the top line is the non-civil service, and it has the percent that the positions were vacant throughout the course of the year. So in fiscal year 18, for non-civil service, it was 10%. You can see that it grew to a high of 21% in 22. Last year, it was 12%, and this year, we're estimating it to be at 5%. We've taken what it has been actually through June and annualized that number, and it's going to be less than half of what it was last year. So we're seeing a big impact from that.
What I'll say about that is what this has what this has meant for us in the past is that sometimes when we fall short in sales tax or revenues that we project, we've been able to sometimes balance things because of the vacancy rate and the salaries that we're able to hold. And now that's not necessarily the case, is because it's a good and a bad. It's showing our retention is strong. It's showing our recruitment is strong because we're able to attract qualified applicants. I think most of our directors would agree and have said to us anecdotally that they've had very qualified applicant pools now. But what that means is that it doesn't give us as much wiggle room,
That
to be able to.
salary savings account's not as big.
Exactly, to be able to balance things where we need to sometimes
Yeah.
because we have those savings. So it's just making us have to really make sure we're doing our due diligence in how we forecast and how we make our expenditures for the budget.
It's great news with just a little less than great side benefit, but still, it's good news.
And on the civil service side, last year was 3% and 3% this year. Police went up from 3 to 5%, and fire went down from 2 to 1%.
Does this include retirements?
Good question.
Because we've had a bunch of people retire, and that's not people.
Yes, ma'am, it does include retirements.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if it didn't have retirements in it. Okay.
This is a look at our budget calendar. This is the last budget workshop that we'll hold prior to the budget being submitted to City Council on August 20th. Prior to that, we will receive the certified roll, so that'll allow us to know more closely the property tax dollars that we'll receive next fiscal year. Already mentioned that there'll be a neighborhood commission presentation on August 21st, and then the 4 public hearings, that 2 on September 3rd and 2 on September 17th, which is the date that City Council will consider the budget and tax rate adoption. All right, so now we will begin to go through the operating funds, and we'll start with the largest operating fund, the general fund. We're beginning with the slide that we last shared with City Council. This was the forecast that showed where we were currently forecasting fiscal year 25. At the time, we were estimating that the total revenues would be just under $111 million, and the total expenses, not including one-time expenses, just operating expenses, would be just over $112 million. We'd be about $1.1 million short in fiscal year 25. Since that time, there's been a lot of changes, some ebb and flow. So the net change in revenues has been a $1.7 million increase. Every revenue source has been evaluated and taken into consideration as the budget policy statement directed. Any recent changes that are impacting trends for those revenue sources. The largest increase in revenue is with interest income. We originally budgeted interest income at $1.3 million, anticipating at the beginning of the year, the Federal Open Market Committee was estimated to make multiple rate cuts as we went throughout the year, and those rate cuts would have a direct impact on our investments. There hasn't been any rate cuts, and now there may only be one this year. Another approach that staff is taking is in the investments that we are investing in, we're investing in 18-month investments that will see us through next fiscal year as well, so we know how much of an interest revenue that we're going to receive. And just for perspective, last fiscal year we received $2.3 million of interest revenue. This year, we're probably going to finish around 2.5. So 1.8 is still a conservative estimate, given the current market.
And the year before was
Oh, it was.
$3.
Probably. Yes, ma'am. On expenditures, there's been a net increase also of $617,000. Staff went through all the expenditure accounts, and many were adjusted down, some were adjusted up. We have listed here what the biggest increase was to expenses, and that's the city's contribution to the San Marcos Hays County Emergency Medical System. In total, our annual contribution will go up $550,000. And we are continue to be in communication with them, discussing that increase to get a better understanding of it. The biggest increase in cost is related to personnel due to adjusting to the unionized labor rates. That's the biggest reason that they've provided for the cost increase. But the city's portion of that is $550,000. So that's the big reason why the expenses went up to 617. So with all that information, this is where we are currently. I just wanted to point out one thing. We touched on this at the last workshop. I just want to touch on it again with sales tax. Is our 2023 sales tax number was just under $40 million. We're estimating in 2024 to finish at 39.5. And with the a slight increase in 25, we're still going to be under that 2023 amount. So we've lost 2 years of sales tax growth. And we've been able to rely on, our 3-year average has been 11%. And last year we saw 7%. So not seeing any growth and actually going back a couple years, that's part of what is having an impact on next year's operating budget. And as you can see, now the total revenue is estimated to be 112.7, and the total expenses are also at 112.7. I'd like to also just point out, if you look at the non-personnel expense, it's a total of $32.4 million, which is less than the adopted budget for this year, which is $33.1 million. So we were able to lower the operating expenses to help balance this budget.
And I want to commend John and the budget team, Tricia Patek, who's here, just because when they showed this to us, even last week, we were not in the black. We were still trying to figure out how to get this balanced. And so, because every single time, and John would say this to me, Stephanie, every time we take 4 steps forward, we take, so many steps back. Every time they would try to find a way to close things, there would always be another thing that would get introduced into the equation. The EMS was the latest one, $550,000 that we had to try to figure out. And he'll get more into the different things with the property taxes. But some of the legislation, while our homeowners are able to see the increases, it is creating some challenges for us. And it's not a bad thing necessarily, because the homeowners are getting to see that, and we want our property tax ratepayers to be able to see that relief. But it's creating, again, that challenge for us in terms of how to make things be more sustainable. So I just want to commend them, because it's been them really sharpening the pencils and fine-tuning and looking at every single place that we can turn to try to refine that. I also want to give kudos to the directors team, because each director that came in, they came in with a thought of, how can I give you money back? How, what can we do without? Y'all may have noticed there were some things even on the fire side, some of the, like the open houses and things, and they're like, well, we're gonna scale back on that this year so that we can do some other things, and still get the equipment and stuff that our firefighters need to serve the community, and things like that. So everybody came in with that kind of mentality of, let me give you some money back to try to help make sure that we could make the budget be more stabilized. So just want to commend everybody for that.
This is the typical slide that you'll see for all of the operating funds. We've already gone over most of this information. Just one thing to point out, if you look in the 2024 estimate, the total revenues are estimated to be just over 109 million, 109.1, and the total expenses are at 109.4. As Ms. Reyes mentioned earlier, we've been able to capture $2.3 million in expense savings to help make up for that shortfall in sales tax. We've talked a lot about this slide. We've shown it over the past few meetings, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. It just shows, at the time that we approved the current year budget, our 12-month rolling average was at 9.5%, and you can see the descent that we've been on since then. Updated for the latest sales tax collection in the month of May, we're at a negative 0.4%. Just one observation to point out on this, you can tell month over month how at first the decrease was by 1 to 2 percentage points. In the last couple of months, it's been more by 1 or 2 basis points. So we're losing a lot less so that you can see that our sales tax is starting to somewhat stabilize. This is a look at our top 15 sales taxpayers. And if you, and it compares prior fiscal year to date through May, total sales tax collections of $9 million to the current fiscal year to date collections, which is $7.3 million. So our top 15 sales taxpayers have collected $1.7 million less through May than what they did in the prior year. The number 1 and the number 15 sales taxpayer make up the bulk of that. The wholesale trade and telecom are the two biggest hit trades or industries with sales tax this year, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a future slide. This has a comparison. It shows what the regional sales tax change year over year is. It has a low of San Marcos of negative 2.4% to a high of Seguin and Kyle, both at 9%. So the regional average is 4.4%. It also shows across all of our peer cities. So you have San Marcos at the negative 2.4 and a high of Garland and Richland Hills at 15 and 17%. Those are really anomalies when you compare them to the rest. If you were to remove them, it would be 3.1%. And statewide, the average is an increase of 2.2%. This is, if you look at the fiscal year 2024 column, which is the center column, it shows the total collections through May have been $25.7 million. And it compares it to what we actually budgeted to receive at this point, and that's $27.4 million. So we're short about $1.7 million from what we budgeted, and we shared earlier that we're forecasting $2.5 million through the end of the fiscal year. And we also shared that we've identified already $2.3 million of that in expense savings. To the right, that compares it to last fiscal year. So last fiscal year at this time, we were at $26.4 million. So we're about $600,000 shorter than where we were at this point last year. And this slide provides some good news. I shared the number 1 and the number 15 sales taxpayer make up the bulk of that decrease in our top 15 sales taxpayers. The number 1 sales taxpayer hit a high in fiscal year 23, and in our communications with that business, they have said that they'll more than likely never have that kind of year again. And so we, in our forecast, we are building that into our forecast. We know what to expect. On the number 15, the telecom company, that was due to an audit finding. So that wasn't anything necessarily less money that company brought in. It was an audit finding by the Texas Comptroller. And they originally decided that the city of San Marcos should receive an allotment of these proceeds. And then in the following fiscal year, there was a change in mind, and some of that was taken back. So that just exacerbated, that difference from year to year. So that was just a result of a comptroller's office audit. And so that will naturally smooth itself out as time goes by.
So whatever decision they made is for now and the future?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And so what this slide shows, if you were to remove those two sales tax payers from both 2023 and 2024, you see our adjusted 2023 sales tax year-to-date through May would be 22.8 million, and our current would be 23.8 million. So we would actually have 1 million of growth, and we would have a 4.4% growth rather than have a negative 2.4% loss. So that's a pretty big swing, and it shows that the sales tax base is growing. It's just these two sales tax payers that are impacting it, and it's not allowing it to grow as much as it otherwise would be. This slide touches on that cyclical reduction in growth and the growth in net property tax value year over year. And what a trend that we typically see is about every 3 years, the growth will be, there's a reduction in growth. It's just less than the prior 2 years. And if you look at that center column, you'll see that our 3, 5, and 10-year average is 15, 12, and 11%. That's on average how much sales tax base grows year over year over those time periods. And in what we see every 3 years, you see in 2016, it was only 6.8%. In 2019, 9.8, 22 is 6.5, and most recently in 25, it was 6.9. So it's well under what the average is, and it's just a business cycle. This is a trend that I've seen in other cities as well. It just tends to be at that every third year where you see a little less of a growth than what you have been experiencing. Something really interesting, if you look at 2025, the growth from 2024 to 2025 is about $668 million. $600 million of that is from new growth. So that means that a very small amount of that growth was actually from reappraisal growth. Typically, we see about 60% of our sales tax growth be from that reappraisal growth. And this year, it's only 11%. So and the numbers that we have dating back to 2014, it's never been that low. The lowest we've seen is 37%. So we're actually estimating that that no new revenue rate, the property tax rate that will bring in the same amount of revenue on properties taxed in both years is going to be really close to our current rate. Also, wanted to point out, if you move to the far right, and that's the fiscal year 2025 changes, we mentioned this in the introduction, the new circuit breaker cap legislation. That is on any non-homestead properties that includes commercial and residential with values of $5 million or less. There's a cap of a 20% growth on those. So it works a lot like the homestead cap. The homestead cap is 10%. So if on these properties, if the value were to increase 25%, they would only pay for up to the 20% amount, and the other 5% gets captured. It'll become taxable someday and some year in the future when that entity doesn't experience that much growth. So if the following year they only grew by, say, 10%, then that other 5% would become taxable at that point. But for this year, it's not taxable because it's capped at that 20%. And in total, that cap captured $123 million of value. which is $745,000 of revenue that we would have received had it not been for this new legislation.
So I was thinking it was like the homestead cap, isn't it 10%?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not like that then.
It works like the homestead cap, yes, it does.
But you said at some point it resets.
Yes, it comes back, and the same happens with homestead cap as well. So if your home goes up value goes up 15%, you will only pay 10% of it.
Right.
The other 5% is captured.
Right.
In the following year, if your home increases 5%, then that other 5% that got captured.
It'll catch up.
Will catch up, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And the other item that we mentioned was the 2 apartment complexes that were purchased by Texas State. That removed $77 million from taxable value from the roll, and $475,000 of revenue. That is split between our downtown tax increment reinvestment zone and the general fund. So the general fund was impacted by $210,000 and the TERS from the remainder of it. The next few slides just share the breakout of total revenues in the general fund and the underlying assumptions that were used in that forecast. So sales tax is the largest revenue source. It makes up 35% of the total revenue. And the forecast includes an increase of 0.8%. That is a 1% on the base, and that the outlets will remain flat. Interestingly, this year, our outlets are actually up. They're up 2% compared to last year. Typically, we see them in that $8 million range, though, so we're just going to estimate that they're going to remain flat next year. Property tax makes up 34% of our revenue, and we're remaining that, and the forecast is assuming that we're staying at our current tax rate. Franchise fees make up 11% of revenue, and the increases are estimated from population growth as well as from increased revenue. The city receives 2 types of franchise fees: from internal companies with our water, wastewater, and electric companies, as well as from the external gas, electric, and cable companies. Transfers make up 8% of revenue, and these are transfers to reimburse the general fund. Support departments like the city manager, human resources, IT, and facilities are paid from the general fund, and then they're allocated to the other funds based on the benefit that those funds receive from those support departments. And so this is just a reimbursement coming back into the general fund. Licenses and permits make up 5%, and all other revenue sources make up 7%, with the largest being the interest revenue that we shared is budgeted at, or is proposed at, $1.85 million. Now moving over to the expense side, the major cost increases in that forecast. The personnel increased by 3 to 5% at a cost of $2.5 million. This includes a cost of living adjustment to match inflation with the non-civil service at $1.2 million and civil service at $1.3 million. There are a total of 7 new positions included in the budget. On this slide are 6. The 4 that you see with an asterisk are budget neutral. So these are positions that were added, and the department reduced their operating expenses to create enough capacity to add those positions. The only 2 outright new positions are the 2 police positions. That's the police officer and the crime analyst, the first 2. The other position is the Housing and Community Development Manager position. That is already a position. It's just funded by Community Development Block Grant in the current budget by 66% of that position was funded by grant funding, and the rest general fund. So in next year's budget, all of it will be funded by the general fund. And that was one of the directives in the budget policy that City Council set. Wanted to share some successes as it relates to the public safety staffing plan. The police staffing study that was completed in 2021 recommended adding 10 new police officer positions. At the time of the study, the total police officers were 112. The police officers in the preliminary fiscal year 2025 budget is 123. So we have met that original goal that we set out to meet of 122 police officers. On the firefighter side, the fire standards of cover and community risk assessment that was completed in 2020 recommended 27 new firefighter positions. The firefighter positions at the time was 75. The firefighter positions in the preliminary 25 budget is 90. If the city were to receive the SAFER grant, and that stands for Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, if the city does receive that grant, that would add 15 more firefighters, and which would bring the total to 105. And with that grant, we would also meet the goal of getting that 2020 assessment at 102.
And for how many years is that grant funded?
3
1, 2,
years.
3? Okay.
And one thing that, just as an anecdotal, so number one, first of all, amazing success that we've been able to do. And thank you, council, for the support to get this done. So this doesn't mean that we're done with doing, the public safety staffing, because this is only to catch us up to where we were at those particular timeframes. But we're not in the dire situation that we were at the time that we asked you for this. Now we can look at doing something that's much more fiscally responsible and saying, okay, maybe there's 2 per year or something like that, right? Along with all the other needs and prioritizing that. So that's number one. Number two, just want to point out that there's been a lot of great strides that have happened in terms of being able to get the staffing and to be able to make sure that we're starting to think long-term about this, I'm calling it a tsunami of what's going to affect us. Once we get rid of the grant funding that we have and we expend all of that and ARPA goes away, we've got to think about all the things that we're going to have to take on. Mm-hmm. So I want council to rest assured and the community to rest assured that our team has been working on that as well, to make sure that we're looking diligently at this tsunami that's going to hit us, that we're going to have to figure out the way to ride. So just wanted to mention that that's part of this, and that's something that we are keeping in mind. We're not looking at this just from a one budget year perspective. We're looking at this from a multiple year perspective.
Moving from personnel to operating cost drivers, the citywide body camera contract, increased $419,000. And the municipal court lease, the current lease is $92,000, and we're budgeting $221,000 for the new facility in the event that the lease terms overlap one another. This slide just shares all of the supplemental requests that were submitted by the departments. In total, the recurring, the non-personnel requests, there were 57 positions requested, and there were 6 of those positions that are included in the preliminary budget. Again, 4 of those are budget neutral. In operational requests, there were 11 requests for $432,000, and 1 of those are included in the preliminary budget, and that is an increase in longevity pay. On the non-recurring, we're estimating that there'll be 1.8 million capacity, and there's a decision point on this later for City Council. The total new requests were 31 at 4.2 million. I'm sorry, I should have started with the first bullet. Ms. Reyes mentioned at the beginning that that the capital outlay was frozen for this year. That's part of the way that we made up for the sales tax shortfall. So those 13 items will get funded first, and that's about $800,000. And then the remaining $1 million will be prioritized by all the departments across the 31 requests that total $4.2 million. So this is the fund balance in excess of 25%. The total amount is $8.6 million of one-time funding. And I wanted to just take a moment to explain this because this question came up a couple different times in our staff meetings where we're running on a lean year and we have $8.6 million that we're able to spend. And the way to think of fund balance in terms of, how your home checking and savings account, fund balance would be your savings account. And in your savings account, you put the one-time money, like from a tax refund or what other source you might get that you might put in your savings account. And it builds up over time. And you use this for unplanned expenses and for one-time expenses, like a down payment on a car, or if your car were to break down. That's what you use this one-time money for. The operating side, the general fund's operating budget is just like your checking account. So in your checking account, that's where your check is deposited and you pay your monthly utility bills and your rent or your mortgage, and your paycheck has to be enough to cover all of those expenses, because if you rely on your savings account, at some point you're going to run out of money. So that's a way that you could think of the two differently. So what we're talking about is just the savings account side. So it's just money that has been built up over time, and we can use it on one-time expenses. So for this is the amount in excess of the 25% fund balance requirement, the $8.6 million. And the proposed uses is to contribute $4 million to the new city hall, the $1.8 million on the 2025 capital outlay, to replace 8 police patrol vehicles at $600,000, the municipal court relocation, $1.2 million. This is money being set aside to renovate the building that is located. And then for the fiscal year 2025 capital improvement program, $1 million. And there's a decision point on the uses of this when we get to the decision point slide. So before the decision point, just some key takeaways in the general fund. As we've discussed throughout the beginning of this evening, fiscal year 2025 is a challenging year. The sales tax revenue forecast for 25 is lower than fiscal year 2023. We have this cyclical reduction in property tax value growth, and our growth from last year to this year being at just over 600 million is much less than what we've seen the past 2 years, which have averaged $1.5 billion in growth. That circuit breaker legislation has had a big impact on property tax revenue. It's over $700,000. And the 2 properties that were moved from the roll by Texas State impacted the general fund by over $200,000 as well. There are more demands than resources, and the reduction in forecasted revenue has been balanced with a reduction in operating expenses, and we went over that when you compare the 25 operating expenses to the 24 operating expenses. As Ms. Reyes mentioned in her opening statement, we need to growth in property tax to offset the volatility in sales tax. Commercial property tax growth reduces the tax burden on residents. That's why economic development is important. We've recently approved, and there are forthcoming economic development agreements. Back at the budget policy, we shared that at that time, the Buc-ee's agreement had just recently been approved, and the value of the investment from Buc-ee's was going to be $34 million, which was equivalent of 182 rooftops being added when you looked at the average fiscal year 2024 residential improvement. And also, as we touched on, sales tax revenue is not only impacting this year, it's also impacting next year. But as that ray of sunshine, I feel like the sales tax base is growing. So I think that we'll probably continue to see some decreases for another few months, and then hopefully we'll start to see it take off again. And that brings us to our decision points for the general fund.
Just something that I want to mention or ask about is that we had things that we wanted to buy this year because we thought they were needed, and we're not because, certain things because of sales tax being down. Next year is a tight year, so I'm assuming we're probably not going to buy those things next year, maybe not. So '26 may be a big year for trying to catch, those things still need to be bought. We still need to buy them at some point in time.
And the plan that we're bringing to you proposes that we catch up in FY '25, this upcoming budget year.
That'd be great.
So that basically we take the one-time monies that we have in excess fund balance above our normal financial capacity, and that we use that to fund the $800,000 in capital outlay that was put on hold for this fiscal year.
Okay?
And then it allows for another $1 million to be spent in new capital outlay expenditures. So that's
Oh,
using
that sounds
one-time monies.
way better.
So that is the plan right here,
Okay.
as far as the decision point, is it's to get us the equipment that we need, because yes, it's great when we have people, but not if they don't have then the resources to do their jobs, or in the case of like the patrol vehicles, believe me, we talked about this ad nauseum almost, just because it was like, okay, do we really need these, or could we put this off? But even the fleet team, that really works on these said, y'all are gonna have astronomical prices when it comes to maintenance costs and repair costs, and they're not covered under our enterprise lease agreement. And so it is something that we need to make the investment on to be sure that we stay able for them to have the right equipment they need to do their jobs.
I was afraid we were going to get further behind, so this is good news.
We're trying to be very diligent and making sure, and that's why I will tell you that I feel like the directors, they didn't want us to get behind in staffing and salaries because we just made such great headway.
Yeah.
That they didn't want us to look at getting behind with inflation. They don't want us to get behind on looking at the equipment and stuff. So they've really come to the table to really make sure that people not only have jobs and, are able to stay competitive with their wages, but also that we have the equipment for them to be able to do their jobs. So that's what this proposal is.
All right,
I
good.
have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is just for the sake of the public, the folks watching. I know in the past we have discussed kind of or addressed the critiques of our community when it comes to the patrol vehicles. I know a lot of folks will say, well, they get to use them when they're doing like their private contract work. Maybe if they didn't do that, it'd have less wear and tear. I know Chase did a really good job answering that. But I'm confident somebody else in the room can also do that. Just, for the folks watching at home.
Do you want to talk a little bit? Yes. Just to talk about the reasoning behind allowing officers to use their patrol vehicles when they're doing contract work or off-duty work.
Good evening, Stan Standers, Police Chief. Let me start off with full transparency. I think the system that we have for off-duty employment is not ideal. You really have a couple of options as it relates to a municipality. Officers can be contracted and paid directly by a vendor. The issue with that is if they take enforcement action, who are they truly working for? Another issue is if they are injured in the pursuit of that job, are they actually covered by workers' comp? That's probably one of the central issues that we have to contend with. So when I first got to San Marcos, I reached out to our risk pool, specifically the loss prevention manager, Irvin Jonick, and said, could you come to San Marcos, because this is a system that I'm not familiar with in San Marcos because we did it remarkably different in my former life. We had a very candid conversation about off-duty employment of San Marcos police officers, usually within the county. There is consensus that what we're doing right now is not in everybody's best interest. to include the officers. Now, the officers probably would disagree with me, but the reality is we've got to have them covered by workers' comp. So, Chase and I, you all know that Chase went to the risk pool. Chase and I met last week and we discussed this very issue. And so we actually have a meeting with one of the local contract providers. You all know his name. We actually have a meeting the second week of July JPA Traffic Services, Danny Arredondo. You know
Oh.
Danny. Yes. We have a meeting with him the second week of July to press into the very questions that Councilwoman Garza correctly points out. So I'm not prepared to give you any answers because the risk pool needs to be very involved in these conversations. That's why I'm thankful that Chase is going to be there. Plus, Chase has our historical tendencies, actions. And I'm bringing about the new perspective that, hey, we need to be doing it differently. So, as it relates to fleet usage, I believe that we should be able to recoup some of those costs. Because the city is incurring the full cost for the maintenance of that vehicle for the benefit of a private entity. In my experience, I think you should be able to identify some cost offset for the maintenance thereof from that private entity if they're gonna use our vehicles. That needs to be a part of that conversation the second week of July. So that's a really long answer to say, hey, it's a great question, let me work it. And it's being done.
Yeah, okay, that I was not expecting any of that because
Sorry.
the way it was presented in the past was a lot more succinct and I think I still was like, that's kind of weird, but I was the anomaly. And I think when the other time we talked about it, Max was the only person who kind of was like, ugh, but okay, yeah, no, sorry.
But do you all agree that the officers probably need to be protected by workers'
I don't know
compensation?
about- You see, I don't know what any of that means, like
Okay, that's fair.
But, you know,
So for my next class reunion that will be held in a city facility, and because some of them want to bring beer, have to have an officer, instead of me contracting with someone directly, we'll contract with the city and we will pay the city and the city will pay the officer? Is that what we're looking at?
I don't think the city is prepared to do that. That's
Okay.
a big lift, and most of the cities that were doing it that way have gotten out of that
Okay.
model.
Well,
That's
You
a
do
big
have
lift.
your meet and confer agreement, which says that we have to offer it to the police association first.
Yeah.
So the meet and confer agreement does say that if it's at a city facility, then we have to offer it to them first. And that's the deal that Councilmember Gaddis is talking about, is that they're off-duty, but they're showing up in uniform
right.
and they're using their vehicle, but yet they're getting paid by an outside entity, whether it's your class
Right.
reunion or whatever private event. So that's,
that, and then like, I think one time, I was dropping off some of my neighbors at their job at Amazon, and there was like police. And I'm over here like, oh my gosh, something going on, like my baby brother's there. And it was explained to me that no, there's not like a terroristic threat at Amazon. It's that, you know, they contract with not just us, but like other folks. So it's
Yes.
stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And hi, Jamie Lee Case, Director of Parks and Recreation, to answer your question regarding the payment process. Whenever someone leases one of our Parks and Recreation facilities, one of our city facilities, it's actually, the contract is between the leasee and the police officer, so they pay them directly. The city, so what we do is we help organize and get someone signed up to work
Right.
that event, but the payment does not come to the city, it goes directly to the officer from whoever is renting the
I
facility.
know, that's what we did, but that was my question, is if we weren't going to do that and they all went through the police department, and that's where I thought you were going with that.
no,
Okay.
we wouldn't have, because of the way that the staffing is and
Oh,
minimum staffing.
that's a huge change.
Right, and so we have to get people that volunteer to do it off-duty.
Yeah.
The key issue is just, should they be able to use their their city uniform and city patrol vehicle, and really more the vehicle more than anything versus the uniform. I think the uniform is obviously part of
Right.
showing the authority, but the car has been a question, and that's one of the things that Chief Standridge is looking into to see if
Okay.
there can be a change in how we handle
Or
that.
if they break their wrist,
Right.
How's that covered? And so you're looking into that aspect.
If they
That's the
break their
workers'
wrist
comp,
doing
right?
something that is not the job of the city?
Well,
or
but
related
if,
to the
let's,
city?
so, let's say they're working under the mayor's example,
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
and something happens and they are responding to initiate a law enforcement action, the city will likely cover that expense. But if they're just walking and they fall off a curve and they break
Then
an
they can
ankle,
sue the city, actually, because we messed up the curb.
we are not going to likely cover that expense because it's not a workers' comp in furtherance of their job as a San Marcos police officer.
I remember that conversation where it's like, okay, especially when we were a little bit shorter staffed, I think, or shorter sort of cops, it was like, okay, well, yeah, if they're there and something wild happens and it's like all hands on deck, like they're gonna be like, peace out, Amazon, and like go respond or something. I remember that, but I mean, you guys seem like you know what you're doing, so
We're looking into it.
We'll
I mean,
just-
that-
We'll eagerly await the response.
Yes.
Yes, the last thing I'll say is, to your point, Ms. Reyes, the request for off-duty employment, what we call secondary employment, is so high that if we, the city or the police department, took that on to manage, it would be at least one, maybe two FTEs, full-time employees. This,
I
that
wasn't
much volume.
suggesting we do it, I just thought that's
Right.
where you were going.
And when it comes to workers' comp, Ms. Basic, I know is out there too, if we needed to bring her, but it's really about normal course and scope of your job. And so that's one of the things that TML risk pool looks at in terms of determining whether it's a covered thing or not, is they look to see, was it in the normal course and scope of your job, or were you doing something outside of that?
And I don't want to stop officers moonlighting, doing security work. I mean, that's like old as
Oh, no.
policing itself.
we won't stop
But,
it.
just the aspect of if they broke their wrists, arresting someone and all that kind of stuff. And so there's some nuances to it. And I'm glad we're kind of looking into it to see what's the best course of action.
Yeah, from a public engagement, community engagement, you don't want to stop it because there's such a demand.
Yeah.
People are worried about their safety. They do like having the peace officer for safety. The one caveat is we do not provide that for businesses that, for purposes of remuneration, get more than 51% from alcohol sales. We do not work at those establishments. Trust me, every bar in the city of San Marcos would love to hire us. I have said no through policy because we don't need to be working for bars for a host of reasons.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you. A few questions, and I think the first question is going to be, when y'all done that survey, was it mandatory, or what percentage of the employees were participated on the survey?
It was not mandatory, and actually, it was a really fast turnaround time. I'm gonna ask Hayden to tell you exactly how many responded, but it was a very high response rate. Both surveys have been extremely high response rates, so I'm happy to say that, and it was not mandatory, it was anonymous. And so they were able to answer in any way, form that they wanted to. Also, there's been rooms for comments and stuff like that. So when it came to the question about like the leading and the way that it's framed, there's also an ability for somebody to put their own free-form, unedited comments if there was something that they felt that they wanted to share with us as well. But as far as response rate and number of employees.
Sure. Hayden Meagle, Director of Administrative Services. So we had just over 350 responses for the survey that was done in 2024, which I think equates to maybe just shy of 50% of the employees at this time. However, we only had it open for, I believe it was 5 or 6 days total, and that includes a couple of weekend days too. So we had it open for less than a week this time, compared to in 2022, we had 375 responses, but we had it open for 3 weeks. I know there were some comments about some of those questions, so that's only an excerpt of a couple of the questions. We had a whole series of 10 questions, and we didn't want to bog down the council with it, but it was a series of questions asking about benefits, asking about vacation leave, sick leave, and kind of using similar type language, like how satisfied are you with the vacation leave that you receive. those two, we did see improvement across all of those questions, but those two were the most dramatic. And Councilmember Scott mentioned that he's kind of a data geek. I geeked out whenever I started seeing those results coming in. I was like, wow, there's double the percentage of employees that are satisfied with their compensation compared to a couple of years ago.
Is there any reason, oh, sorry, that y'all don't give us the full report on that?
We typically don't, only because it's usually what we use to make administrative decisions and recommendations to y'all. There's no reason we can't.
Right.
But
'Cause
it's
yeah.
really about, more of like, okay, if the employees, we were asking them, hey, if we're in a tight budget year and we have an option of doing this or that, then what would you prefer, right? Because we want to make sure that we're keeping a pulse of our employees. And so we bring the high-level data to you in terms of saying, okay, this is what went into the management decision to make the recommendations that we're making. But again, there's nothing confidential about it that says that. The only thing I will say is that, you know, we haven't given them the expectation that the information's going to council. We've given them the expectation that it's coming to management and that we're looking at it and reviewing it. So I don't know if that would make a difference, you know, to them and what they would say or how they would respond to this, but just want to be fully transparent that we've definitely said that, hey, it's really being used for management to make decisions.
I mean, surely most employees understand that everything is like open to open records requests.
Yes.
And yeah,
Yes.
okay. I was just curious. I think I got the first one. It was very insightful. It helped me personally hear like the actual words that illustrate some of these asks that are sometimes just bullets to us. Like it helped kind of put a voice. You know, obviously it's anonymous, but it still, I feel like was very compelling.
Now,
So that's the only reason I asked.
the most
Yeah,
recent
no.
one did not have as many questions that were
Open-ended.
freeform, that were open-ended. It actually only had one, and it was very limited to, would you be interested in an incentive for like transportation alternatives? So it did not have as many open-ended questions as the last one. The only questions that were consistent were those about salary, benefits, vacation.
Right, okay.
And we have two, so after the compensation study finished, then it was, okay, we're gonna go into the next phase, right? And look at the benefits and look at what was provided as the employee engagement survey. So we have a group of, a cross-section of directors and some assistant directors that come together to form these two teams. One's looking at pay, one's looking at benefits. And so we wanted to make sure that we were still keeping front of mind the things that the employees value. Not looking at what was in 2022, wanting to make sure that now that the compensation study's been completed, does that change how they feel about that? How do they want to be recognized for, you know, for high performance? How do they want to be recognized for exhibiting core values and things like that? If we're in a tight budget year, do they want us to look at increasing the benefits that they get, or do they want us really to look at base pay? So those were the types of things we wanted to make sure, again, that we're keeping a good pulse on our organization so that we can stay strong and having a good culture organizationally and continue to be a strong employer. So that's really the thing, but again, I don't have any problems with us sharing any of that information if y'all have an interest in it. There's no issue with us doing that. It helps to inform your decisions too better in terms of understanding the recommendations we're providing to you.
So I have a few more questions.
Sorry.
And the other question that I have is, when the revenue for speeding tickets, passing red lights, where does that revenue go to the general fund?
Yes. Yes, sir.
And can we get a number of how much, do you have an idea how much revenue we're getting off of that? No idea. Well, it's okay, just
They can
email
get
me.
We
back
can
with us on
probably
that.
look it up and share it with council in a few minutes.
Okay, that's okay. The other question I have is, we have 112 employees, police officers, correct? How many code enforcers and marshals do we have, and do they ever cross over?
Good question.
We have, by budget ordinance, an authorized 123 police officers, including myself. As far as marshals, I believe they have 10 actual marshals plus supervisors. You asked the question, how often do they bleed over? Probably on a nearly daily basis. In theory, the marshals handle the green space. And you all know that we have probably 500 acres plus of green space. The marshals handle all of the green space. They handle, to include the original offense reports, if there's a car burglary, if there's a theft, they handle all of those because they're fully certified peace officers. The PD handles everything else within the city. The issue is the marshals may have 8 on duty for a busy weekend, and you all have had lots of communication as it relates to Memorial Day and us prepping for July 4th. 8 or even 10 cannot handle the influx of 20,000 plus visitors into the green spaces on a very, very busy weekend. And so there will be a natural overlap to some extent between police and the marshals. Now, the issue is, for all of us, just to be completely candid and you all to be aware, policing across Texas, they staff for a normal day. They have a minimum staffing. They do not staff for the exceptional. When we have an event like Memorial Day weekend or a July 4th weekend, it's an exceptional. The problem we're having on the police side is there's so much availability of overtime because we're still 6 cops short and we're in the throes of summer. Nobody wants to do their overtime. Coupled with the fact it's a holiday weekend. So it's nearly impossible to hire overtime officers to assist the marshals. So we are working with JPA Traffic Services, and Rodney Gonzalez told me today that there's some movement there, that they will be able to, the city, will be able to contract for some of those outside officers to assist the marshals, to assist the PD. The PD hopes to plus up a couple because we're going to be super busy throughout the city. It's a long answer to your question. We probably have daily overlap, but the job duties are remarkably different.
So
Then-
the other thing that I will add, so the chief's talking primarily about how the police go to supplement the marshal's office. Now, the reverse happens as well during off-season for the marshals. Right now is peak season for the marshals, right? And so that's where we're seeing the influx. But there are times during their non-peak season when PD is short, traffic cops or things like that, that the marshals can go in and sub in for them to try to help with that. And it's again because they don't have the peak season that they have. That's the situation right now. So just want to be fair in saying that, yes, right now PD can go and supplement the marshals, but the marshals also go and supplement the PD when the PD needs some help, during some of their off-peak season time for the marshals.
And that's a very common occurrence. I'll give you a specific instance. We had 3 fatalities almost back-to-back on Interstate 35. Takes a tremendous amount of bodies as it relates to traffic control. Marshals Division immediately stepped up and provided, and we're talking for hours, they were out there assisting us. So it's a great working relationship. It's just everybody is incredibly lean.
Right. The reason I'm asking that question, I said it once before, when they see our citizens see marshal, they think it's a state marshal that they're showing up or something like that. But, and I also seen it where one of our marshals stops a regular vehicle, and I'm sure it was justified. But that was the question I had, and how about court enforcement? What role do they play thank you very much. What role do they play when it comes to tickets or anything like that?
So Greg Carr, Director of Neighborhood Enhancement. So the numbers is we have 6 authorized code compliance officers. We're staffed right now with 5 plus 1 supervisor. Ours is more of a collaborative role. We don't do the tickets, we don't do the arrests. We do the ancillary type stuff that leads to that. Vacant structures where maybe people are hanging out that shouldn't be there, so then the crimes occur. The apartment complex that we worked with the police department, the fire department, we do a lot of that to solve systemic kind of crimes or issues so that we don't have to put resources for them.
good answer. That's,
We
No, I know.
use, and one of the things when Lonzo Anderson joins our team, he talked a lot about the use of multidisciplinary teams that he's used to doing for solving complex issues. And so I suspect that that will be another thing that we will see. For example, he said that's something that they've used very successfully in Dallas. And so you're going to probably see more of this overlap that happens between some of the areas, because it is a way that we provide minimum staffing, as the chief said, during what we anticipate just as normal day-to-day. But there are those extraordinary things that, hey, just the day-to-day isn't addressing what we need to address. So we need to figure out other ways to maximize our resources, and that's when we pool some of this similar, groups together to see how we can try to make more of an impact in some of these areas. So that's one way to do that. The marshals are, and Marshal Huffman's not here, but, normally you would see, because they are licensed peace officers, and if they see something happen in front of them, then that's when they're going to do that. So, but that doesn't mean that that's their assignment, is to be doing traffic patrol. They just happen to be at a certain place at the certain time, that's where some of that happens
right.
as well.
I can understand that. That's all the
Anything else?
questions I have for now, and I really appreciate y'all's answers.
By the way, this is a great line of questioning and answers, because this has been a big concern of mine, public safety concerns, especially during these peak times, are very popular river parks, and you want to make sure that those parks are safe for people. So I'm glad we're having a layered approach, contracting out officers as well during those peak times. Do we have funds for that in the 2025 budget, or are we making funds available for that now, or is it a combination of both?
So you're going to be seeing a budget amendment that's going to come to you, because we don't have funds budgeted to be able to contract those 8 officers that we're contracting to be able to do for July 4th weekend. So it may not be on your August 2nd agenda, but it's probably going to be, on your July 2nd agenda, but it's probably going to be on your first meeting in August, because we're going to need to find a way to pay them. But safety is such a huge issue. We're going to be doing the postseason report with y'all in terms of talking about some ideas for long-term, controlling access, looking at paid, entries, ways. I hate to use the way of saying it this way, but basically taking our parks back for the locals. And, the people who live here that don't get to go there because they're shut out from all the visitors that we have. And so, again, we'll be open to people who want to visit our beautiful city and want to be a part of it, but they should be able to do it for free. That's really our residents who pay for that, and so we want to make sure that we're looking at that. So those are some recommendations that we're working on. We've got to look at the here and the now and how we can get through from a safety perspective, and so that's what we're doing. And so you will be seeing a budget amendment. There will be some other things that we make in terms of recommendations for going forward in terms of funding sources to be able to resource the issue and the area as appropriate as possible.
Excellent. This is something that we can manage. We can stay on top of it. We don't want this to spiral out of control. And like when I visit the very beautiful beaches there in Corpus Christi, I have a parking, beach sticker. There's ways that people visit our town, and we'd love for folks to come visit San Marcos. San Marcos, is a town that everyone in Texas has fond memories and loves to swim our river, and we want to keep that going. But paid parking, controlled access, making sure it's staffed with public safety. Excellent answers, and I'm glad we're being proactive.
We're working on it, and Ms. Ibarra has worked very diligently to try to get us some of the data that is now accessible, through people's cell phone data
Well, I
and
heard the
stuff like
chief
that.
mention 20,000. I didn't know if there was.
We have that, but then also she's able to track where they're coming from. And so that's helpful for us, because it's helpful for us to know, okay, how tourism dollars can be spent and all of that, but also for us to know where our marketing goes. So for a multitude of reasons, it's important. But again, it helps to show where that usage is coming from, and it doesn't look like it's local, it is people who are coming from outside our community. And again, we're a town that's open, we want to be that, but we want to make sure that we're not taxing our resources and not providing a safe environment for people to enjoy the river as best as possible.
That data can't tell me how much money they're spending, can it?
No?
No, I don't
No.
think so. Okay.
And to follow up on Mr. Gonzalez's question on traffic fines, last year it was $570,000, and we're estimating around $600,000 this current fiscal year, and that's what's budgeted next fiscal year, $600,000.
Thank you. Figured it'd be more than that. Because they're so expensive when you get
Takeaways and decision points. Is that what we're?
Yes, sir, yeah, we're at the
So
decision
the
point.
decision points,
Do you agree with our proposal and our recommendation, which is on the screen,
That-
that we
that's-
continue to budget?
That's where we're going to go as soon as we
Yes.
finish all of our other conversations,
Yes,
is
yes,
these
ma'am.
decision points right here. So are y'all ready? Okay. The first one, is that a question? Because it was in this presentation, this is what we're going to do. So are you looking for confirmation or?
Yeah, if city council had any reservations, given the trend information that we shared this information, then this would be an opportunity for council to share that with us.
Okay.
You could say no.
Yeah.
You could say no, base it at 0, or alternatively could say,
Negative
can we,
2%?
can we make it 2%?
I don't
We
know
wouldn't
more about
recommend that,
this
but-
than what y'all do, who have studied it and looked, at research and this, that, and the other. So personally, I'm going with this first one, 8%, and then 1, and outlets at 0. It was kind of good when we were underestimating our sales tax, and then we had a little bonus money every year, and then we didn't, so
And
anyway.
we're still doing that, actually, because we wouldn't end with an $8 million surplus to what we need above our financial policy if we
Yeah.
weren't budgeting conservatively.
Yeah.
Because you'd be spending all of your money,
Right.
and so then you wouldn't have as much that you're putting in your savings account, if you will.
Right.
Because you'd be using your month-to-month expenses.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I liked it when we had the surprise at the end of the year, and then we could spend it. Okay, council, are y'all good with the first two items up here? 8% overall, base at 1 and outlets at 0?
Now it's 0.8%.
8/10, yes, 8, well, 8. 8 as opposed to 9, whatever the decimal is in front of it. So, okay, so are y'all good with that? I'm looking for Mr. Gleason too. Okay, so we're all good with that. And then the next is maintain the property tax rate at the current rate, which we said that at Vision. I think we said it again at Budget Policy Workshop. So this is just confirming we're still there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and everybody that we're saying that yes now, that means this is what we're doing, and don't come back in September when we're getting ready to approve the budget and go, can we lower that? I appreciate the thought, but if we're gonna do something, September is not the time.
That's annoying, Mayor.
what?
I feel like if we can do whatever we want in September, like I get what you're saying, but it's also just like, come on, like, I don't know, that was just annoying to me, but,
Sorry, it's happened multiple years.
okay.
And we don't change it, we burn time on it. So I'm gonna put that we're okay on this one, because nobody's telling me they're not. And employee compensation, philosophy, fund cost of living to match.
There's no like
Inflation.
estimate for that, like that's just like, we're gonna do it and then it's like open-ended.
Yes, ma'am. The cost for the non-civil service employees, I believe was at $1.2 million, and the cost for the civil service was 1.3, so in total, it was 2.5.
And the reason that you're seeing a range, Councilmember Gadisa, is because right now, the proposal shows 3% for non-civil service employees. The 5% is because that's what is contractually obligated under the police and fire meet and confer agreements. So that's why you see that, because this is combined for civil service and non-civil service. But for non-civil service, we're proposing a 3% increase.
I
And
just
for civil service.
don't see that, so that's why I was asking.
Yes, so that's what
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Gotcha. Yeah, in the future, it'd be helpful if you could just put that there.
Yeah.
'Cause
What I-
I
what I-
scrolled up and didn't find it either.
But what I will tell you is that we have to be, I know it's transparent, but it also, our non-civil service employees, that is sticker shock when you look at something and you see a 3% for non-civil, and then you see a 5% for civil. And so that does create, so just, again, people are probably watching and they're hearing what I'm saying, but just what
Right.
that does in terms of messaging, it was intentional. So I'll say that, but if that's not what council would like to see in the future, then we'll note that. But it was done because of the inequities with staff,
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
so.
I think based on the first survey, I think it's pretty clear that staff are having that conversation amongst themselves anyways. I do know that there was some points that had that, so I feel like my grandmother always says, no se puede tapar el sol con un dedo. You can't cover the sun with your finger. You're still gonna get sunburn. I think, I think it's like they're already talking about it. And there's justifications that have happened on this dais, so, I mean, if we, as a body, not me individually, can justify that with our whole chest, I think it's fine, so, thank you.
Yeah, it is what it is, so why not
Yep.
say so? But my question is this a across-the-board increase, or is this a pool and there's merit inside that percent?
There's not merit in this particular pool.
It's all COLA.
It's all, I wouldn't say that it's COLA necessarily, but it's an across-the-board, yes. And the justification, again, for that is on the non-civil side. Meet and confer, I'm
No,
not
I
going to
get
go
all
there.
that.
But
That's-
it is because inflation is 3%, and so it also is keeping up with that, so that we're not losing traction for what we just came from doing the market study.
So it's a COLA intent.
It can be, yes.
My question was, is every employee going to get the same amount?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I was going to.
Yes.
So, is there any pool of money available for merit or
No.
market?
No, because that's what we're trying to figure out in terms of merit. That was part of the survey. And so
Yeah.
what we're doing is we're trying to understand, what does that look like in terms of base pay versus one-time incentives? And so that's something else that committee is going to be looking at over this next fiscal year in terms of what kind of system is the best system that we could put into place for that,
Yeah,
to
but with
recognize merit.
that whole expensive compensation study that we didn't we get some market changes out of that?
Yes, and those were already implemented.
Okay, so those are done, which is
Yes.
one of the reasons why we went from 33 to 61%.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so now this is to help us not lose traction with the great work that was just done to catch people up to market. If inflation is
But
3%.
at some point, we're going to have to catch up to market again.
We'll do another market study. I
Yeah.
mean, that was part of your compensation philosophy, was saying that we would do those market studies every 3 years.
Okay, but we won't be doing one this next year,
Not a market study, no ma'am.
or market implementation.
Not
In-
market
in
implementation.
salary, okay.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, is everyone ready with the fund cost of living, 3 to 5? And the next one is improve recruitment and retention of employees, increase longevity. What does that mean on a budget slide?
That is, currently employees, the non-civil service employees receive $7 per month for each year of service, and it increases it from $7 to $8 per month.
Okay. So it's to increase the amount, that was at what, that fund, 400?
I'm sorry?
$400,000 number?
No,
was it?
no, it's less than
that
that.
is 30-some thousand, 36.
It's like
$35,000.
$36,000 to implement it.
That's right, the 400 something else. Okay. Council, good with that?
And again, this is just on retention.
Yeah. Looking at Mr. Gleason, thumbs up. Okay, we're good with that. We've got use of fund balance in excess of what we need to keep. So that means there's $8.5 million in that account that's available?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is how you're suggesting that it be allocated?
Yes.
Council, what's your thoughts? Any of them?
Are the patrol vehicles rented, leased, or do we actually buy them?
Typically, they are leased. These particular, there are a number of patrol vehicles that haven't transitioned over to the enterprise lease. These particular vehicles were supposed to transition over next fiscal year. And since there is zero capacity right now for recurring operating expenses, that's why we're proposing to just buy these outright instead of leasing them. If we were to move them to the enterprise lease, the annual payment would be around $240,000 on it. And we don't have $240,000 available, to pay next
I
year
understand.
as a recurring expense.
Thank you.
Why is a one-year lease cost more than buying a vehicle?
Because you have to have it, you have to program it into your base budget as a recurring expense versus a one-time expense. So you're paying cash for it as opposed to paying it off for like 5 years or whatever. And so you have to put that in as a recurring versus a one-time,
You're talking about the lease?
the lease, correct?
Okay. And these, we're talking about buying
Paying
on
cash.
time or paying cash?
Paying cash,
And what is 8 vehicles gonna cost us?
$600,000.
If you break it down to one vehicle, what are we looking at?
75, yes, sir.
Okay.
And that includes purchasing the vehicle and all the upfitting that is associated with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens. Mr. Mendoza, are you good with all this?
Yes, ma'am. My colleagues have been hitting every single question, so.
Beating you to it, huh?
Yes, ma'am. And that's
Okay.
good. I'm glad.
All right, Mr. Gonzalez,
That's it.
you're good with it? Mr. Prather? I'm looking at Mr. Gleason. I don't see Mr. Scott online.
I'm good, Mayor.
Okay. Ms. Garza?
I think this is probably the only time to address this. It doesn't really flow, but I had emailed city staff earlier to give me some clarification. I think there have been some confusion among us regarding previous discussions, with several council members believing that we had already approved like a position of a dedicated resource, like a navigator within our city services. I think it's really important to clarify that when we are also weighing all the different critical needs. And I just wanted to voice that one of my biggest frustrations is that time and time again, we vote to fund programs and initiatives, services that are very much needed in our community. And I appreciate the staff bringing those, to us, fleshing it out, and I was voting for it. Only for me and others to find out that some of the programs have like significant lags of time of delivery. CDBG, that was a hot mess express with the airship issues. There's a 6 to 8 lag with community action and so on and so forth. And so my understanding of this role would be to help folks get connected with stuff. And it's difficult for me to even want to talk to my constituents because I don't know where to send them. And then I spend a substantial amount of time trying to find them resources and then more time trying to understand what got lost in the sauce between our direction and the way the programs are being executed. Does that make sense? Because I thought, and several others of us thought, that we had said yes to that. But then it got eaten up by DAI person, which I also would have assumed would be somebody who would be assessing these programs to make sure that how they're executed matched the intention of the council and that they were being delivered equitably, and I'm not seeing that either, so.
That is part of the role of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator, and that is, I think, part of the reason why we've said that she can handle some of this resource navigation, because with her position in the city manager's office and also reaching out to the different organizations, she's got a lot of that knowledge and she can point people to the right direction. I guess going specifically to that benefits navigator, that was one of the ideas that was presented almost 2 years ago, on June 27th, 2022, as one of the possible items for the first part of the second tranche of American Rescue Plan funding. However, it was below the line of the recommended programs. During that discussion, it was never brought above the line. Because then we followed up on July 5th of 2022 with a resolution allocating that first part of the second tranche. That benefits navigator was still on the list of possible programs whenever we came back in February of 2023, but it was never brought forward as a program to fund through American Rescue Plan funding.
When you say it was never brought forward, that means we went around and said that that wasn't a priority?
We didn't go line item through line item. However, it was never brought to the top along with the recommended programs.
By who? What was, how, like, who would have brought that up?
Through the council discussion.
That's interesting.
So we had a list of recommended programs.
That big old Excel sheet?
It was, yes, it was a big Excel sheet.
Interesting.
But we had it listed, and I checked that this afternoon.
Interesting. I guess, okay, what you said, will you remind me what you just said about then the DEI staff person's responsibility in terms of what you just said, like the equity part and the programs and the...
I think as she's become acclimated with the organization and the community, that is some of the things that she's also, I mean, in addition to becoming, familiar with our organization itself, it is seeing what resources are out there in the community, hosting a lot of the members of those organizations in dream sessions and actually meeting with them one-on-one just to hear about what's available, so that she is an additional resource in our office, just like any one of our staff in the city manager's office. And there are a number of staff throughout the organization who are very familiar with those organizations and can help our residents.
Yes, because that's the thing, is you have to have somebody who really understands and anytime there's a new program, there's gonna be things that, like you cited the stuff with CDBG. Well, some of those programs are new programs that have to be established and implemented and worked through that. And so our staff is getting up to speed on that. And then to have to get another person, that's why a lot of times it's the subject matter expert that we always recommend that you go through. Because if not, you're having to go through and train this whole other person on all the city programs, and that doesn't seem like it's the most efficient or effective use of resources. On the one thing. The other part is that, if y'all will recall, some of the things that I've talked about is wanting to do a One City, One Voice initiative. That's part of it, is that then we all kind of become resource navigators. And I'll give you an example of something that I'm thinking about with this, and we're gonna get another, again, multifunctional, cross-functional team to get together and tackle this issue. Somebody wrote into one of our departments and said, hey, I need to disconnect my services, right? It was not the right department. And what did my department, that is within the city said, oh, well, you need to contact this department. That's a thing for me where I'm like, hey, in their mind, they've already reached out to the city. That department should be saying, it's this department that you need to talk with, and I've copied so-and-so on this message so that they can reach out to you and do that. So that is part of the One City, One Voice. Also, the issues that have come up in the past with contacting a certain department and then for open records requests or something like that, not the city clerk's office, and them saying, okay, well, no responsive documents. Well, why was it no responsive documents? Because you went to the wrong entity within the city. And so instead it should be, there was no responsive documents because you need to contact this department instead. And again, copy a department so somebody could reach out to you. So we all become more of that navigator to help people connect to the right services versus having one person who, again, it's not the most efficient because they have to get schooled on every single thing
Right.
that's happening.
I understand all of that,
So,
Stephanie.
and that's where Goody Cell has been able to help fill some of that role.
I just feel, like I've said this in the past, that the reason why in most municipalities and most governmental entities that have like a DEI role, their job typically doesn't overlap with the resource navigator because somebody should be the person who is like actually looking at the programs as they're being delivered to the community, so that, there's plenty of social services that we continue to fund every year, right? To see that if those programs as written are truly meeting the needs that our constituents tell us every day. And I'm just like really confused as to why I hear from my constituents that we have situations like a 30-week pregnant woman who is now 6 months behind of rent and is facing eviction, being denied from BR3T and every other service that we funded. And when you drill it down, it's because the way that those contracts were written were fundamentally flawed and inequitable. And it doesn't take like a rocket scientist to see that. And I'm just like wondering why I'm hearing that from my peers who talk to their constituents and from my own constituents, which is why I was going to ask that we consider a resource navigator as like a critical addition and somehow like allot some money to do that, because I don't know what the disconnect is as to why somebody's not doing that job. Is it because they're too busy trying to help our neighbors struggling get the resources? Like, I'm just really confused as to how we land where I'm at, and I don't know if my peers want to share their experiences.
I hear the same concerns that you just mentioned. One of the biggest complaints I get is when they call and let's say they need assistance for their rent, whoever answers that call doesn't know where to send them and doesn't have recommend, or you can go through this entity or there or here. But I hear what you're saying. I hear that quite a bit. I'm glad you brought that up.
It's very frustrating to me, because I don't have staff, I don't have a researcher, I don't have constituent outreach. It's literally me usually calling one of y'all to like be like, can you help me work through this? I just need somebody to make it so that this doesn't happen
And I'm
every
going
day.
to offer up, send it to me, because that's what.
That's inequitable in and of
That's
itself.
what we're here for, is to help,
Yeah.
Right.
help the people navigate these services, so, yes. That's what we're here for, the CMO.
I mean,
Whenever we get the emails that go to council member groups, I notice like they, if it's, someone needing help with the rent or something, or like the telephone pole or something, I've noticed like usually within the day, I see response from
Right.
like city level management.
Yes.
It's
And,
it's quite
and
impressive.
you do very well, but the thing is, that's tackling like minor, like one incidences, right? I don't think there's a systemic issue happening where like telephone poles are a harm, right? You all are fantastic at that, and I always feel so guilty emailing y'all about little things like that when I know that you're already, especially you're already juggling like 100 things. My thing is like, what I am discovering, it's more than just a one person. A lot of the times, like, somebody in the staff will pick up the phone and advocate for this one person. And I sit there wondering, I wonder how many other people didn't somehow get to somebody in power to call somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody to approach their case with more leniency, or more, we're gonna make this exception because, we didn't know when we wrote this contract that this would happen and that, you know what I mean? It's more of a systemic issue, not like go fix the telephone pole.
But I'd say you still need to let us know, because we do have processes in place, such as Human Services Advisory Board, such as a CDBG, and we can address it with those organizations. We might not be able to fix everything. I mean, we won't be able to, but we can at least speak with them and see what we can do to improve.
Get some answers.
Respectfully, I have brought up the barriers and issues with BR3T for a very long time.
Yeah.
And what has come of that? Absolutely nothing. On a daily basis, people facing evictions, and I understand, like, in all of these decision points, y'all ask us to be considerate of the moment, right? We're struggling, the whole world's struggling, but our neighbors are struggling. And so I'm just like, I don't have any answers. The only solution I could think of is give us somebody who is going to, that's like their only job. Because I don't have anybody that I can delegate that to. And I can't keep doing it. Like, I'd be texting the mayor, what do I do? But it's an issue that it reproduces, because it seems to our neighbors that we're wiping our hands and being like, well, we increased the Human Services Fund to this amount, gold star. Well, we voted for, give more money to these places. And then our neighbors are like, yeah, girl, but like the most vulnerable don't even qualify because nobody's keeping an eye on does that make sense?
It does, and I'd say that we are still formalizing some of those processes and making improvements, I guess, even to our funding processes to the organizations. So, I guess, we're not quite to the point where we have evaluation plugged in there as well. And I say that because my wife is like a grant evaluator in her job. So getting to that point is another step. And honestly, I don't think we're there quite yet, but it's something that we could definitely look into.
But us understanding the deficiencies, if there are systemic issues, that helps us. And I know, yes, you have brought up about the BR3T. I think the thing with it is that, we do work through our staff because we've contracted with an organization to do these programs since we ourselves don't do it and don't administer it ourselves. So we do let the staff know that there's an issue and what's been brought to our attention, and then they work with BR3T to try to, you know, deal with whatever that is. I don't know that a resource navigator is going to be able to help if there are issues with the organization that we're contracting with and how they're administering the program. That's where I'm trying to
Right,
just
so
kind of
let me ask you this then. Whenever folks do reach out to one of y'all, whoever's the catch-all, is there anybody intentionally documenting the barriers that our neighbors are facing, particularly when navigating their, whether they qualify or not, for the programs that we fund?
So, I mean, we document it through, I'm gonna say very, very globally in terms of, you know, because we do it through email a lot of times, that we're trying to make sure that we're sharing the feedback and then getting the feedback back. I'm gonna ask Mr. Pentalion, because I know that he has worked a lot with Ms. Griffith on the BR3T to talk about that one more specifically. But I do know that, yes, we do get that information, we do take it back, and we do provide it to the providers to try to see how we can work through those issues when they're brought to our attention.
So when I say intentionally, I mean like you're tallying it, like you can tell me like, you know, from this time to this time, we received X amount of calls that were about the community action utilities. These are reasons why they were denied. These are da-da-da-da. Then we referred them to St. Vicente de Paul. They were able to meet those needs. Like, that's what I mean by intentionally, not documenting it in email correspondence.
Well, and now, do we globally have something for all the different assistance and programs? No, that we do for intentionality, because again, every department handholds different programs differently. The St. Vincent de Paul is going to be utilities, and so obviously if utilities gets something where somebody's bringing an issue in terms of, I can't afford my utilities, that they're going to work with them and refer them, because that's part of their script, is that, you know, if somebody can't pay, okay, well, here are some resources that can help you. Now, I don't know what goes into that, as far as saying, okay, let me document that this person has said this or that. No, because we handle things when we get them, and we try to work through those issues in real time. It's not us trying to keep a tally, you know, of it. Now, as far as hearing systemic, now we heard the systemic about some of the stuff for the home programs in terms of the airship, right? And people who have problems with not having leases and titles and all that. Well, we worked through that very intentionally with HUD to try to see how we could try to find a system that would work because of people who had generational wealth or things like that. We even took that as far as when we went to do our lobby trip, talked with our, you know, the federal agency of HUD, not just the state office or the district office. We talked with the federal, you know, HUD office about it, and they said, hey, this is a very important issue. Y'all aren't the only ones that are facing this, and we're working on providing relief for it. So when we hear systemic issues, then it's something that we try to make sure that we're elevating, but we're working them in real time. We're not keeping tallies of things to then be able to go and say, okay, look, this is where you failed 5 times or whatever in the past. We try to document those again in real time and talk through those things as they're occurring to try to nip it in the bud and so that it doesn't continue happening.
And yet it continues to happen. And so I think that's just my concern. Look, I'm really not getting energy from anybody else that you guys feel this is like a priority. So perhaps we can have like another agenda item, like in a future, because I feel, and like, how long have we had like somebody specifically devoted for DEI, and we still don't have a plan to assess equity of programs that we're funding, when we know, like, this isn't like this shouldn't be a big surprise to anybody. Like, we know these barriers exist. The issue is that we're not doing anything, and the perception of our neighbors is like, okay, cool, yeah, you sign off on giving all this money away for what? Who is it helping? Not the woman who's about to pop and she's not gonna have anywhere to live.
So I will use this as a time to plug. We have a series of dream sessions coming up later in July that are breaking down barriers and finding resources. So, and I understand that's,
The
yes.
dream session that one time had 3 attendees. I mean, be so for real, Hayden.
But ask those 3 attendees what they got out of it, and,
I did.
okay. I'm just saying, we need people to also, they need to be able to trust their government. That is part of the roles of that position, to try to increase the trust in the community.
Gotcha. I mean, my recommendation was fund this person or funds, I don't know what, like that. To me, we all thought it was funded already, and then it's like, JK, LOL, no. Maybe not all of us, but some of us. But I don't hear any energy,
this
so
is-
it's whatever.
Well, this is why I could remember it, but didn't remember what the resolution was when you asked me, and I said, ask Hayden, because he will know. No, I have concerns. You were just carrying the load. I was just, you know.
And I did talk about, I know it didn't rise up, and again, it's council's prerogative, wherever you want to go with this, but just know that if you're upset about the systems right now that aren't effectively doing things, you're going to have the same people overseeing another person to try to do this, and so that's going to make things difficult, because the person's going to be operating in a vacuum to try to learn all the different programs and all the different things that there are out there to do that. So that is something that I would have concerns about in terms of the efficacy of how we make that as effective as possible. So just being honest about that, you know, because it feels like, again, we're very responsive, and it doesn't mean that everybody on our team is responsive, and I want to know if there's somebody who's not, because we need to make sure that there's responsiveness. That's an expectation that I have of our team, is to be responsive, and I mean at all levels of the organization, not just city manager's office, whenever something comes to our attention. And I get, people will call me. I got an email today about a pothole. I know you're not the person, but can you help me with this? And I navigate and get them to the right person. I'm gonna copy this person and that person, and this is who needs to do it. So we get that. A lot of times Karen will get messages where somebody wants to talk straight to the city manager or the city manager's office, and it's stuff where they don't start within the other parts, and we do get them to those places. So that's the thing where I'm feeling a little bit of a disconnect, but I hear what you're saying in terms of the interest. I just don't know what the right solution is for it. So that's where, you know, again, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. It's just, what's the right solution for it?
What is it that other cities use, and this has, you know, there's various and sundry things. There's street sign missing. Is it 311?
They have a 311 system.
211 is for assistance, and 311 is to report stuff. That we use the Connect.
We use the Citizen Connect, and we do get a lot. I mean, and that's the deal, is that I don't want it to sound like none of our efforts are effective, because there's a lot, we do have data to be able to show how many things we get through all these other mechanisms, and so we could produce that if that's what's needed. But I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Gata, says that there's still some that aren't getting connected with us to the right resources, but what I'm trying to understand, is it getting them to the right place to know where to do it, or is it because of the way a program is structured, and that's two different issues?
Right, so the thing is, then whose responsibility is it to assess the efficacies of those programs, right? Like because you're saying, so the thing is, it's not even that y'all aren't being responsive, is that because there's nobody intentionally going and assessing these things to bring us back feedback, I get all these constituent concerns and I dump them on y'all. And that feels terrible, because I know you're, running a whole city, right? And then nothing, maybe every now and then, like, our neighbors, get aid, again, in like individual cases, but the prevailing underlying causes to why they didn't get that assistance to begin with that we funded is not being addressed, right? So I have expressed to exhaustion different scenarios regarding people who did not qualify for BER3T, and nothing's come up, nobody, I even told you, this is a concern I'm hearing. It's a pattern, right? So it's not just like one or two people. Like, you have to wait until you get like this eviction thing and da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da. And so it's like that it doesn't match. The parameters don't match the reality of what's unfolding in our communities when it comes to them working with their landlords. So to me, it's just like insanity to sit here and fund programs that are not even set up to give money to the folks who need it the most. And the only reason I know that is because,
People are telling you.
yes, and I
Yeah.
think it's unfair also because my job lends itself to that, right? So I don't sit here and be like, well, I'm just a person of the people, and that's what everybody tells me. No, like, if I had another job, if I still worked at the university, my proximity to my community would be less, and I'd have less feedback. So it's like somebody else should be doing that to tell us, so that when we're approached again, like, hey, we have this money, do you guys, I mean, where do we put this money for utilities, da, da, da. We don't keep replicating the processes that continue to fail our neighbors. Like,
And that's
it's
where-
crazy to me.
And that's where I'm feeling like the scope of what you're talking about is different than a navigator.
Right,
Because the
so,
navigator,
yes.
yes, and that's what I'm trying to understand so that we can get to the root.
Right.
It's more about program evaluation. And so it's more about like
Well, then
making
we'll
sure.
do that, then put that on there.
So you know
Thank
what I'm
you.
saying? So that's why I'm trying to get to the heart of what it is that's the interest and what is causing the problem. If it's that we're not matching people, to where they need to go, and we're not guiding them
So-
and steering them, then that's a navigator. I get that.
My understanding was that Grisel was supposed to be doing a whole bunch of stuff, and every time somebody forwards her a need, and then she's gonna go do navigator stuff. So that was like I guess the root of we need a DI person to be doing like their DEI job, and a patient navigator, not a patient navigator, like a resource navigator is very time consuming. So it's like, so that was the energy that I received from staff when I keep calling and asking, is that like, well, like we're just one peoples and So that's what I'm saying. And also because of the frustrations that I feel from several of the folks who also serve that role informally, it's like, I don't know, I feel like it's also unfair to put that role to like a handful of other staffers too, when it's like their side quest, right? So that's not even really a part of their actual job, right? And so, but I'm kind of exhausted from this conversation, I'm not gonna lie.
Go ahead.
I couldn't agree with you more, Councilmember Garza, and I apologize for not being more vocal, but I hear the same concerns over and over again. And some of these people are really in need for paying their rent and things of that nature. But I always tell them, call the city and call me back if they don't respond, and they get tired, they don't even call me back because they think I ignored them as well. But I just wanted to voice my opinion on that.
And again, I think it's about, one is connecting people, and that's something that absolutely, we want to make sure we're getting people to the right thing. But it's what I'm hearing, and again, if I'm not hearing y'all correctly, please correct me, because I'm trying to make sure we're understanding. We can only do what we think that we understand your expectations to be. And if you're not clear on your expectations, or we're not clear on saying we understand your expectations, then we all walk out of here not being successful. And that's not what our goal is, right? And so what I'm hearing, though, is it's not that people aren't getting connected to people, because, Councilmember Gadisa, for example, has sent me somebody who was with WIC that wasn't able to get her formula, and Grisel worked with her very successfully to understand what were the constraints and how she could get the formula that she needed through WIC. So people are getting connected, but what I'm hearing is it's more about the way programs are structured, and that is a much bigger issue, because if we're not administering the program ourselves, and we give money to other agencies to administer, they go based on what they understand and know to be the best practices of how you go through that. What are the guidelines? What are all the things that put in place that determine your eligibility, whether you qualify or whatever? And so that's the bigger thing. And there are so many programs. Look at all of our social service partners. That is a much bigger thing to tackle. And if you don't do it systemically, or unless you do it based on what you're hearing in terms of that criticism or barriers that are happening. So that's the part that I'm trying to make sure I understand.
I'm glad that you shared that, because honestly, a lot of these agencies are throwing it back on y'all. Like that y'all are the ones who write things in a rigid way, that they, provide feedback, and that their hands are tied. And so, that this is beyond my pay grade. I get paid 50 cents. Thank you for sharing that, because that is not the energy I'm hearing from folks that work in these entities. Yeah, interesting.
So, I mean, that's something that, again, if we're not making the mark on where some of this stuff is intended to go, but again, if we're not specializing in utility assistance, we know that, hey, we want to be able to do this or that or whatever, and there are other programs out there, and they do something that mirrors whatever the other funding sources that they get, and these are the rules and regulations because it helps to make things for them to be able to administer, then we work through that. Yes, if there are specific expectations that you as council give us or that we, know because we know just from doing our jobs that we want to be able to say to the agencies, then obviously we pass that direction on when it comes to how we administer the funds. But without having some of that specific direction on some of that, then we go with what the best practices are for administering whatever type of funding source that it is that we're talking about.
But the question that we need to ask ourselves on this is, is the city going to be a social service agency and provide funding for any of that? That's another question, and we don't have that. And we don't have, we provide the $500,000 through Human Services, and we have utility assistance that's administered through another agency. But we do, I think we live so close to Austin and we hear about all the things that they're doing, and we simply don't have the funding to do so much of what they do. And so we rely on others, and I think that's where it gets tricky, is with their rules and regulations. But I think we need to find out more about what Ms. Garza's talking about, is if they're saying that a contract, and tell me if I'm saying this wrong, that their agreement with us is keeping them from helping people, then
Right.
we need to.
We need to know about that because
We
then
need
we
to
need to
figure
look and
that
see
out.
why that's
Right.
happening.
And to me, it's like, why isn't anybody trying to figure this out, right? Because it's just, it feels really bizarre to fund things and not know if they're being delivered in the way that we assumed that they would, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, do y'all know that there's like a backlog or like the wait for the turnaround time to get the utility assistance? It's like stuff like that would be great to know, because then I look like a dingus and like a hypocrite being like, yeah, we really push it, we increase social services, and again the neighbors are like, for what? Then don't do it. Like if you're gonna, you know what I mean? Like it almost feels like the message we're giving our neighbors is social services is not our lane. We care about roads, but not the people who walk on them. And we gonna write checks, and then if you qualify, you qualify, and then if you don't, we're also not gonna see why, if there's like ways to pivot. Because I understand best practices, but I also understand, I think it's important to name that every community is different. So I feel like it would make sense that you pivot and adjust if there's a documented pattern of barriers that perhaps don't need to be there.
And maybe that's something that we put, because of course, when you look at the process, and again, my mind's going on, how do we try to do this with the process? And so if it's, yes, the council allocates so much money to go to your social service partners, and that is allocated through your Human Services Advisory Board, largely, unless there's other direct, and then there's agreements that are done that have what are the scope of services and what are the deliverables that you want to see in it. And then those are the agreements that come to you for approval to look to make sure that there's something there. So if there's something that we need to put to tighten up the reporting aspect of the funds and the efficacy of those funds and being able to meet the intended target. Now, I rely on every single department that works with those agencies. They have conversations. Like if I look at Mr. Locke right now and say, hey, how often do y'all meet with community action in your utility assistance or utility billing department? They should have those meetings to be talking about what's working, what's not working, what are they hearing. If people are calling the city and telling us what's going on, there's that open dialogue. Looking at Amanda, who's at the podium and can probably offer some more stuff on BR3T. Again, if we're hearing something and they're hearing stuff on their side, it's having that dialogue to be able to work out to say, hey, here's something that has been happening that we've been finding. But sometimes it depends on if people just want no rules, or is it a systemic problem that it really is not getting to the intended purpose? And so I think that's the balance of trying to do that, but there is that dialogue. So we could put something stricter in there as far as, how they report whether things are reaching problems, you know what I mean, and how they report that to the city. We could put something in there about the, you know, that really talks about the reports that they would provide in regard to the funding that they get. So, I mean, there's ways we could do those kinds of things, but I'm just trying to brainstorm here, and our team could help
Do you
us
get
do
a
more of that.
progress report or anything like that from
Matthew
them?
has his hand
Oh,
up,
I'm sorry,
and
Matthew.
I've been waiting also, so hang on, you're on the list.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, wow. So, since we're on this topic here, the two questions I get every single time we bring up DIE, and it's from all different sides of our community, is justify why you guys provided that employment to somebody. Okay. The second one is explain to me what they're doing. And I continuously justify it, and I will continue to justify why we should keep this individual employed to this position, because we still have to think about that for the next fiscal little meeting we're gonna have. I, of course, would love to have a navigator, but the fact is, if we're dying on budget now, we have somebody who, my impression was, this DIE person was going to be above and beyond, to be the outreach, to be that one point of person that is a community. Of course, it's good for us to reach out and know that every single person on the COM is gonna be out there and willing to work. But we also have a lot of individuals who we want to have build, like we said, build that trust with our community. So to have that one point of reference to sit there and say, hey, I reached out to this person, I know I can point out there. I'm not bothering 15 other people with, we know that they're working, you know, they have sensitivity to that. I would like to see city staff or council itself reevaluate what that position does entail. I would like to add on that position for her to be an advisor for our boards, not just our boards, but when we have handing outs, when we have money to give out to 503s. I think it'd be good for this individual to just review things and sit there and say, hey, this is what I see in a common practice. I mean, I want to get them involved with this, and it seems like one of those positions that they should be involved with. Not so much recommendations, but setting a path, saying, this is where I see this going. I mean, obviously the data is there, but I would just like to see that position to justify us securing that position for these years. I want to see it expanded. I wanted to see a full outreach. If we want to really use DIE, let's give a reason to explain it to our citizens. Let's justify this, and I think Mrs. Garza is 100% right to have it. We need somebody to help navigate that. Just please consider that. That's my request that I have.
Definitely, and I know, so for those of you who were not here, and I don't remember if you
I
were,
was not, no, ma'am.
Councilmember Mendoza, when the DEI position was formulated, during one of the council workshops, we asked, okay, if you're gonna do DEI, what does that look like? And we gave like list of job responsibilities, and we asked y'all to tell us, what do you want this person to do? And so that's how her job description was formulated. It was formulated from that input that we got from council. So again, it's a new position. It's something that with all of us, when it comes to our skill sets, our strengths, our experience, niches that we find that happen in the community or that aren't being met, then some are things that we have a passion for. Sometimes we serve in other capacities, right, than maybe what that intended purpose is. All of our roles can evolve at times. So if there's something we need to revisit in regard to what the role of that particular position is, then we can absolutely do that. We just need to understand, and that's why I've been working so hard to try to, and I'm not trying to exhaust you, Councilmember Gattis, I'm just really looking for clarity. That's really it, just so that I can make sure that we can do our best to deliver on what those expectations are. So again, if this is about really having her look at more of the program evaluation of some of the things that we do and that the city funds, then that can be something that we can talk about and see what that looks like. But that's the specific direction versus, okay, if it's connecting people with resources, you know, I think it's probably a little bit of both is what I'm hearing. You want to connect them to resources by having the programs be more effective at removing barriers. Am I capturing that correctly?
And it is something that she has started to do already. So she participated in the evaluation for the Minority Business Stabilization Fund funding that was awarded through the American Rescue Plan. And with this CDBG process that we're still in the middle of it, but she served on the committee for that as well. So starting to kind of ease into that, but we can definitely look at other opportunities.
Were you talking about our human services funding recipients?
Oh, well, just any kind of, basically any program that we are gonna have that we are doing any kind of social services. I'd like for it to be reviewed.
That's our
and just-
human services
then yes,
funding.
But I mean, I actually like to get it out there for parks and things like that. I mean, we really need to involve this DIE person to be the best that we can, again, just to justify us keeping.
DEI
position.
is working with the
Well, I
departments here.
just want to make sure, since if there's obviously a lack in communication, or if our citizens don't know to reach out to that person, if our citizens don't even know what the DEI does, we want to ensure, like, neighborhood meetings. I mean, it's great these dream sessions are happening, but the truth is, half of our citizens are too busy or just rely on us to do the thing. So I just want to make sure she's more involved, very much so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez, then Mr. Prather, and then I have a question.
During applications, when people apply for jobs, usually they have at the very bottom, and other responsibilities. That covers up to a certain point, but I just wanted to bring that up real quick. But accountability, did we just give them a blank check and not know where it went?
No, there's, as I mentioned, so you allocate the money, right? And so then the social services, the Human Services Advisory Board meets. They go through a process of making a presentation, all that kind of stuff. They make the selection of who they recommend to city council for the funds to be allocated to. That comes to y'all approve that. Then from there, what happens is that then there are agreements that are done with each of those individual agencies that specify the scope of the services that they're providing, the deliverables, all of that kind of stuff. So then that is what is used to be able to hold the agency accountable for, these are the things that we said we wanted you to do with the money that we're providing you from the
Right.
city.
And you get a report on that to make sure it's getting.
That is what happens, yes.
Yes, so we're actually on a reimbursement program. Amanda Hernandez, Director of Planning and Development Services. Not only do they have to tell us up front what they want to do, before we give them any money, they have to report that they've already done the things. So if they do not do what they said they were going to do, they would not be reimbursed the funding that they requested. I believe so.
This is for Human Services Advisory.
Human Services Advisory Board.
That's not true for like BR3T and some of those others.
CDBG is a bigger animal, and we're dealing with federal regulations, so when Councilmember Garza said rigid, I nodded a little bit to that because we do have to be a little bit more rigid, and while I have the microphone on me, if you hear of individuals who are getting denied or hitting a roadblock for some reason, if you can send us their information so we can look at their individual situation, it's really hard to write across the board policies and procedures that work in every single instance, and we do occasionally have the outliers. So we do want to hear about that, and we want to figure out how we can help those people. If it's not the program they went to apply for, maybe we can direct them to some other place that we know may have funding for their situation specifically.
I guess what I was referring to is BRT, they under that umbrella, or they report differently?
They're under the CDBG umbrella.
Yeah, CDBG, so they have policies and procedures, they have to do reporting that we actually have to send to the federal government to prove that not only are they following the policies and procedures, but that they're meeting a federally identified need.
But they are their own entity, correct?
Yes, and they contract with
Right.
us.
Right, but they're not a city department, they're not a county
No,
department,
they're-
they're their own entity like the food bank and some of the others.
But I guess what I want to know, I want to make sure that they're reporting, hey, we paid so much money on light. Those are the kind of reports
So that would be on community action.
community action
So for
for
community
utility
action would do the utility assistance, and so yes, those are the things that they report to Mr. Locke and his team on utility billing to say, this is the amount of funding we had, this is what we expended, da-da-da-da. So yes, that is what happens with that particular type of funding.
Does that work for the rental payments as well, or that goes under?
The rental assistance is also BR3T, isn't it?
Yeah,
They're one of them.
they're one of them.
all right.
But we have to get reports for everything that we subcontract for with federal money.
But BR3T gets money from other entities, not just us. We're a small part
Yes,
of.
they have multiple programs running to do different things. We're just one of those programs.
And that's the thing that makes it hard when you do contract with an outside organization too, is because they've got to look at how they administer. And it's like, okay, if it's for Hayes County, if it's for city, or if it's for, you know, another entity, there's different rules, right? And so you have to make sure. But the other aspect is that sometimes you can even say, hey, we really want to help this particular type of individual that is suffering from whatever else. But if it's not something that meets federal standards, then it ties our hands in terms of how that funding can be utilized and how we could do a program that still complies with federal guidelines. And so that's why it's so complex. You know, we're trying to simplify and put a solution on something that's not a simple thing. It's a very, very complex situation. That's why every single time when there is a situation that comes up that is a, hey, I've heard that this problem is taking place, that's why you're always gonna hear us say, can you give us their name? Can you give us their number? Can you give us whatever information we can? Because it is very specific to whatever that situation is to help us know how we can make modifications to assist. But if we don't get that information and we just hear something very general, that doesn't help us fix anything. And so that's where you're gonna be frustrated with us, because you're gonna be feeling like, y'all aren't doing anything about it. Well, if I don't have the specific information to do it, then I can't follow up on it as effectively.
And when you say to us, who do you mean? So like, it's very exhausting to me. The CDBG airship conversation is like one of them. We had people emailing us and CCing all of y'all, explaining the airship issues and da-da-da-da-da. Some folks that I would argue are pretty close in proximity to power, and even they were having difficulties navigating it. And even with that, I was like, okay, well, they're seeing there's a trend there, you know, I'm sure, surely they're addressing it. I felt as if I had to just like exhaust myself, like cause a scene. I almost feel like I had to be like, what's happening, da-da-da-da, because we just never got updates. And I struggle to articulate this or convey it without wanting to seem dismissive of the efforts, but I think it's important to name that, like, the folks who volunteered, or some of the folks who volunteered because they were hearing all those quejas from their neighbors, and we all run in like the same little group and whatnot, but it's like, I think that onus shouldn't be on me. Like, I shouldn't be sitting there trying to figure out what connects to bring the city to help with a program that, in my opinion, like, it shouldn't be a surprise that there's airship issues, because like we've gone through 2 historic floods. Like to me, it's like, why isn't there somebody who's doing that? Whose job is that?
That's the thing. If I could convey to you any more, and the council members that went on the Washington D.C. trip can tell you, they said this was something happening like throughout. It is not just specific to San Marcos.
Right, and I understand
So we
that,
were
Stephanie.
working with the system to try to figure out how we could get a nod to move forward on the airship stuff with HUD, right? And so what HUD has indicated to us is, because it's been a systemic issue and that so many communities have struggled with it, that they are working on providing some relief and a solution to that. So our people were working on it behind the scenes in terms of trying to figure out through HUD, could we sign affidavits? Could we do, you know, something else to try to mitigate what was happening? But we have to get their, you know, we have to ask Mother May I before we do it. We can't do it on our own and be innovative on it. We have to be able to get that approval to do it.
Right. I think, this is the last thing I'm gonna say. It's like, I understand all that. I appreciate that effort. I know other cities just left it and just said, we're not gonna mess with it. So I've named that, and I just wanna name also, like, me expressing the frustrations that I'm hearing from our neighbors shouldn't be synonymous with like, that is like a personal attack, or like not acknowledging like the work that y'all have put through it. But even on that, like, it's just frustrating to me, because it's like, there's other things that y'all ended up doing that it's like my neighbors were like, well, why couldn't they have done that to begin with? Why did it take them that long to get the volunteers? Da, da, da. But I hear staff when they said, well, we didn't understand to what scope, because, you know, folks aren't telling us, or folks are telling da, 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 da. Folks are sending it to just one council member and not everybody. Like, the thing is, they don't know how to articulate the need to what entity. And yes, when somebody finds the person who's gonna help them, they are responsive. Y'all do help them. But then it's like, everybody else isn't even aware of that, like, issue. And so I don't even know how, it's crazy. Like, it's just the way that we have been addressing these, like, patterns of issues is nonsensical to me. I feel like it's giving everybody more work, and it's leaving our neighbors frustrated, and y'all fix it, because that's what you get paid for.
Send them to us. I mean, send them, like, if you want one person, send them, you know, or one office, send them to us. Let us help navigate that and work
Who
through
is
them.
us? Who am I writing this email to?
To the CMO executive team, because that gets all of us and all the
Okay.
people who need to do it. So if you say, do it to the CMO executive team, that gets everybody.
And I'm also
Mayor,
hearing that you might, well, what we need to do, and I think we realized this as we were going through the process, more touch points, because we were in the background diligently trying to figure out what other communities were doing, and found out a lot of communities said, if you have issues with title and airship, we're not helping you, we're gonna go find someone else. But we recognize that those people who have those issues were actually the ones in the most need for the funding. So we were in the background doing that work, and I will acknowledge that we did not touch base enough with our applicants. We did not touch base enough with the city council, so you all knew what was going on in the background. And that's definitely a lessons learned, and we can improve on that as our programs move forward. But we've got great news coming with that rehab. The money's going out the door, so.
Mr. Gary?
Yes, Mayor. I just want to, I think I've extended a bit of latitude on this discussion because really this is a budget discussion. I think we've gotten into some operational issues, but I just want to bring it back to the original, what prompted this was, I guess, the
Other
question
direction
of
to
whether a
staff.
certain position is going to be funded or not. So I think we need to bring it back to that just to stick with the agenda posting. And I understand the discussion because it's all getting to the point, is this position, the navigator, something that is desired? And I guess what I need for the benefit of the city manager, what is the expectation for the next budget discussion? I haven't heard a consensus. She's supposed to come back with a cost for a position, or what is her direction on the budget?
What I was just getting ready to do is go around the table and see who wants to move forward on what. So
That'd be great.
thank you
Thank you.
for leading us into that. And so,
And Mayor, we could, as one alternative for y'all to consider, you know, we could look at, as we've been talking through this, is really go back and talk with, you know, Hayden and look at the position of the DEI, if that's where y'all want to look at, and look at a portion of that, looking, you know, at the program evaluation and being a part of that. I need to understand what Goody Sell's experiences in that particular area to see if that's something that, you know, could be helpful, but that could be one avenue.
I need to check on 4
Yes, ma'am.
to see. I'm going to put Ms. Garza down as a yes. Ms. Gonzalez is a yes.
Yes, as far as funding a new position.
Not necessarily funding, but looking at how we can resolve, provide the information. It may or may not mean funding another position or something. That's what they will bring back to us.
And this includes looking at DEI. Yes,
It's how we're going to get, do we need a navigator
Sure.
of some type, and we let them figure out who and how?
That's fine.
They'll bring that back.
Yeah, or
Mr.
incorporate
Prather?
those responsibilities into existing job, yes.
We're gonna let
Yeah,
them
we'll
come back with something and not presuppose. Mr. Gleason, are you good with this?
Yeah, and I'm a little very weary of actually funding another position, but I'm definitely open at looking at it and see what staff comes up with, especially with the existing staff.
Right. Well, all I'm looking for is to see if we're in agreement that this is an issue that we need to talk about. It's something that we need to resolve, and we'll let the staff come back as to how to do it. I'm not jumping up and saying, oh, we just need to go hire somebody for that. That's not where I'm going. I mean, that's where we may end up, but we're gonna
I
let
mean, I
Ms.
think
Reyes
this
and
is
others
something we
figure it
should,
out.
I think this is something we should always be discussing. I mean, these are talking about implementing programs and how do people navigate all of it and the bureaucracy and then how the non-governmental organizations and nonprofits and stuff. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just something that should always be a continual conversation.
exactly. Okay. So we are, that is our other direction for staff. And we're in agreement that our community has needs, and sometimes we fill them and sometimes it's others. And we need to see how others are doing that too. Are there any other items under general fund? Okay, we've been here for a while, so we're going to take a break. I'm not even going to ask you, we're just going to do it. And if you would, be back in your seats at 8 o'clock, ready to roll into our next 2 sections, maybe 3. So 4, Mr. Locke, please continue.
I'm sorry, the slide's not. Oh, okay.
Well, we're going to be talking about other governmental operating funds, special revenue funds. I see the mouse. There you go. It worked.
Yeah, I think it's working out. Thank you. Yes, Mayor, we're going to be talking about 2 special revenue funds, the Hotel Tax Fund and the Community Enhancement Fund. And the Hotel Tax Fund is the first fund that we're going to discuss. Wanted to just bring your attention to a couple items on the Hotel Tax Fund slide. The first is the hotel and venue tax. The hotel tax is a 7% tax, and the venue tax is the 2% that is used to repay the conference center debt that was issued. And fiscal year 23, you'll see that we brought in $4.8 million, and we're estimating to end the year slightly below that at $4.5 million, and we're estimating next year to be a little bit lower at $4 million. And on the next slide, we'll go over in a little bit more detail why that is. In total, if you look at the expenses, the operating expenses for fiscal year 25 are lower than what the expenses are for the 24 budget. And we're estimating to finish fiscal year 25 at $2.6 million. The fund balance, the budget policy recommended to explore a reserve requirement of 25%, and that amount would be $1.1 million, so we would be at the required fund balance policy. This slide explains a little why we're estimating that the hotel tax will go down in fiscal year 2025. I mentioned on the previous slide, what this slide is showing is the total 7% component of hotel tax each year from 2019 through what we're estimating to be in 2025. And the white number that you see within the column is the percent change from the prior year. So in 2024, we're estimating that the hotel tax will be down slightly, about 5%. We'll finish about $3.5 million. We originally were estimating for it to remain flat in next year in 2025. The Embassy Suites is going to undergo a remodeling. It's going to take about 9 months in total from November through July. And we've reduced the amount of hotel tax just out of pure caution to make sure that we don't overestimate what hotel tax will be, because there will be some rooms that people will be able to find within San Marcos, and perhaps some will go outside of San Marcos due to this remodeling, but that's the reason for the reduction from the 3.5 to the 3.1. That'll just be a one-time thing for this remodel, and then the following year, the hotel tax will pick back up. These are the underlying assumptions going into the hotel tax revenue. I mentioned the hotel tax 7%. Originally, we were going to estimate that it would remain flat. Now we're estimating that it'll go down about 11%, and that's due to the Embassy Suites remodeling. A similar scenario with the venue tax that is used to repay the conference center debt. The original was going to be flat, and now we're estimating that it'll be about a 10% reduction. And the other revenue sources only make up about 6%, and those are interest revenue and the transfer that the general fund makes into the hotel tax fund to cover part of the Main Street program expenses. This slide provides the major cost drivers within the hotel tax fund. There's the 3% increase that the employees will receive, the changes to longevity, and there's one new position that is included in the preliminary budget, and that is a downtown ground specialist. This is one of those positions that was funded through the tax increment reinvestment zone, the downtown TERS. This will initially be funded with ARP dollars and through December of 2026. There's also a new crew cab truck lease for use with the downtown team, and the second phase of wayfinding, which will be $500,000. This is just a look at the total supplemental request for this fund. There was the one request for the downtown grounds position that is included. It will be funded by ARP dollars. And then there's the vehicle for the Main Street program. This slide provides focus on what the goal is with the hotel tax dollars and focusing on two of the strategic goals that City Council has set: the quality of life, sense of place, and economic vitality. Under the quality of life and sense of place, it's arts and cultural grant opportunities for festivals, events, and art markets and cultural programming, providing murals, including the Gateway mural into downtown, and neighborhood murals, and as well as city entry points. Installing public art in Rio Vista Park, functional art in downtown areas, and as well as along the San Marcos River, and heritage and historic grant opportunities for events and programming. Under the economic vitality goal, it's paid advertising, tourism blogs, and social media to promote our local businesses. Downtown events such as Music on the Square, Bubble Fest, Make Music Day that generate traffic for our downtown businesses, new cityway finding signage, and financial support for hosting and servicing conferences and sporting events. The next couple of slides explain a little bit about, it provides a little bit more detail on the hotel tax fund balance, as well as what you can use hotel tax dollars for. This is just on the initial fund overview slide. It said that we were going to finish fiscal year 2025 with a $2.6 million fund balance. Of that amount, there's $641,000 that has been set aside for permanent art commitments. So that really leaves just over $2 million that is unreserved. Mentioned that the 25% reserve requirement is the $1.1 million. So we have about $850,000 that is above that 25% requirement. And just a little background on the Texas hotel occupancy tax. The state established the hotel occupancy tax as a way for cities to promote growth in tourism and hotel activity. Hotel guests pay a local and a state tax for every night's stay, which generates dollars that can be used for tourism programs and for tourism-related facilities. Unlike the general city revenues, like in the general fund that we just discussed, hotel tax dollars have to be used for a specific purpose, other than a general public purpose. There's a two-part test. The first part is every local hotel tax revenue expenditure must directly enhance and promote tourism and the convention and hotel industry. And if it does that, then it goes to the second part, which is every expenditure has to clearly fit into one of the 9 statutorily provided categories of expenditures for hotel tax revenues. And those 9 categories are listed right here. Some of the categories have ceilings. So for instance, grants to the art, you can't spend any more than 15%. And that's similar for historical restoration and preservation projects. It just has a ceiling. You can't spend any more than a certain amount on it. And some have minimums. So advertising and promotion has a minimum amount. We have to spend a minimum amount on that activity. This is a look at how much is being spent in the current fiscal year budget on the different categories. So the Convention Center and Visitor Information Center is 34%. The advertising and promotion to attract tourists is 23%. Promotion of the arts is just under 13%. Historical restoration and preservation is 2.7%, and wayfinding and signage is 13.7%. And that concludes the hotel tax. There is a decision point slide for the 2 special revenue funds. Would you like me to go through the Community Enhancement Fund or pause there?
Yeah, let's finish up hotel
Okay,
while we're talking about hotel, because I have a question. There may be others.
okay. Yes, Mayor.
Where are we going to put dollars and how many for historic efforts?
The total amount in the FY25 budget is I believe it's $45,000, 50,000. It is 50,000 in the hotel tax fund and $145,000 in the general fund.
No, I'm looking at that 15% that we talked about at Vision, which was a whole lot more money than that to talk about historic preservation and restoration. I think it was like $500,000.
The $500,000 would be the ceiling amount? Yes, ma'am. That's the maximum amount that we would be able to spend on that category.
I understand. The question is, how much are we planning to spend in this next budget?
Hello, Rebecca Ibarra, Director of Destination Services. Ma'am, we are waiting for direction from council for you to give us direction of how much money you would like to include in the budget.
Okay, then I didn't see it on the decision points, but I've now added it to the list.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And I started with the maximum of the minimum of 50,000. That's what I had put in there.
Right. Okay, and it's good to know that there's actually, I know that there's a percent, but it's nice to see that there's money there, and that 15% might actually be some dollars. It's more than $1.92.
Yes,
So,
sorry. My
okay,
apologies.
that's okay. No, that's fine. We're going to get there. I don't know which, I've got that it's slide number, 40. Yeah, y'all added some slides. Okay, one of the decision points, which I don't know that we have an option of really saying no, is the remodel of the Embassy Suites. Now, they redid their lobby and they recarpeted and they did a bunch of stuff just a few years ago. Is this in the actual hotel rooms themselves? And so there's going to be rooms that are
This is their entire property and
everything? So there's going to be, let's say they had 10 rooms today, they might only have like 8 at certain times or 6 because they're
Correct.
going through the, okay.
they're doing it very systematically, and they came and showed us actually what it looks like. They're using the river as the theme. It's going to be beautiful, but they're redoing the entire thing.
Oh, advertising our river.
It's not, it's the colors. It's the colors of the rhythm of the river. They're not advertising the river, but they're giving the ambiance of nature, and it's a lot of blue, green hues, less orange. It's like more blue, green.
Well, well, and the carpet that they used to have when you saw pictures of the Chambers Green Show, you couldn't even tell what was in the photo because the carpet was just so loud.
They're doing, I mean, it's.
The new is a
it's-
little better.
It's green, it's blue, it's kind of more warm hues, more natural nature, really leaning into the fact
That's
that
good.
we're a more natural.
But bottom line, it's gonna happen. So
Yes, ma'am.
is this really a decision point for us?
Yes, they're gonna do floor by floor, so it's not really, I mean, it's
So
not.
there's, so,
Yeah.
everybody okay with this thing that's gonna happen anyway?
I mean, when you put it that way.
It was on the list, but I guess we could tell them, no, they can't, but. There we go. And then we've got the downtown grounds specialist. Folks, this has been one of the best things that we've done downtown in a long time. There's the 2 people that were added. We've got coverage 7 days a week. It's been really good. We just need to get it paid outside of TERS. So are y'all, we're good with this? This really makes us look way better to the public. And then it looks like there's a truck needed, and it's not one that we would lease?
It is.
It is, it
Yes,
is.
Mayor. It's a lease.
And this one, we can, there's enough capacity in hotel occupancy tax dollars for it to be a recurring expense as opposed to paying for them outright cash,
Yeah.
like we did with the patrol vehicles.
Okay, folks, I would like to see us spend that whole 15%. And I understand that there are, it's got to be for tourism. I get all that. But we've got a lot of buildings in our town that are historic, that bring tourists in. They're used for various and sundry things. I'd like to finally get that Dunbar building maybe closer to being done. So it's not money we can use for,
And that 15%
Right.
is, did I hear you say $500,000 or?
is it 540? Depends on what the budget is. It's 15%, so it depends on receipts. Yeah, it's actually enough to maybe do something.
Okay, and this is 15% of that 500,000, or is that 500,000?
It's a 15% of the big total that we bring in.
Okay, I was like, whoa, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not, sure.
You're good with that?
I'll go with 15%, let's go for it.
Okay.
I think, I might be wrong, but when we talked about this before, I think there was some energy around, because you said historic, like the cultural centers, right, too? Like, is that something that could be used to help some of our cultural centers? They're historic buildings, or is it our historic buildings?
Could we use this for our museum funding?
I think as long as it meets the 2-part test.
As long as it meets.
Remind me, 2-part test, remind me what it.
Tourism
Must
and,
impact the tourism and the convention and hotel industry, so it must bring in heads and beds.
Right.
And then it
Right.
must meet one of the 9 criteria, which is the historic, so. And,
Gotcha,
and we will create a grant process
Okay.
and with a panel, and then they will be the evaluators of that as well, besides
Yeah.
staff.
Cool, yeah, 'cause
But-
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking like, it would be cool, like 2 birds, one scone. You saw what I did there?
Making me hungry.
The cultural centers, because I think they could bring in some cool stuff that would bring folks from other
long
Well,
areas.
it
as it
gives me a
meets a
chance to
two-part
step
test.
up.
let's,
Two-part
let's look
test.
at that. Yeah, so one of the things that y'all do a great job of, because I questioned one time, why are we doing all this stuff and there's things that aren't in the city and all this other stuff? And y'all said we have to have enough things for people to do, so they stay overnight once or twice. That was one of the most important things you ever told me about hotel tax and tourism. And y'all do a good job. So that's more, it's just one more. But could we do the museum funding out of?
I think we could. I mean, so would you still be talking about using the 500 and whatever the 15% is from here, from hotel, and then you still want the 145,000 in general fund for historic preservation as well?
Let's figure out what we can do, but I was thinking that would relieve the general fund of $100,000. So let's look and see if we can make it past the test and
Okay.
all that. Okay, but I need to finish going around the table. Ms. Garza, Mr. Prather, good for historic restoration? Okay, I'm saying yes, and Mr. Gleason?
Absolutely, Mayor.
All right. So we're good with that. I realize that there may be some things that shift and it may not be every dollar, but it's more than $1.98.
Yeah, I think, I said yes, but also just out of curiosity, like, it would be cool to, like, get an idea of how, you said historic restoration? So she said how,
Yes, ma'am.
like, how, like, what, in what scenarios that has, like, passed the two test? What did she just call it?
Two-part test.
The two-part test, you know, the Texas two-step. Yeah, I think that would be cool, because I mean, like, I don't doubt it happens. But maybe not right now, but like in the future, I think that'd be cool. I'm not expecting you to pop quiz
Well,
it.
the thing is, if we did it and we never told anybody about it, that would be a problem.
Right,
But
right,
if
right.
we do it and we promote it as part of our kind of museum tour, things to see, you know, once it gets done, then that's, you know,
Then that can-
another thing, so.
We'll come back with you with answers.
Yeah, cool, because I don't know nothing about that.
Appreciate
It's
that.
interesting.
Okay. Are we good with hotel tax? On to the next one.
Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna go backward to get to the beginning of community enhancement. There we go.
Oh, too far.
Okay. In our Community Enhancement Fund, you'll see that the revenue from FY '24 to FY '25 is increasing, and that is only from growth. There's no assumption of a rate increase associated with the community enhancement fee. You'll also notice that we are going to use a little bit of fund balance, about $66,000 of fund balance. The estimated revenues are $1,088,000 and expenses $1.1 million. So we'll end with a fund balance of $681,000. We knew that we would use a little bit of fund balance. One of the items in a budget policy is to explore moving the code enforcement officers from the Community Enhancement Fund into the general fund, and that was going to be moving one of the positions in fiscal year '27 and the other position in fiscal year '28. Until we get there, we knew that we would use a little bit of fund balance. And once those positions are transitioned into the general fund, then the fund is more self-sustaining and it wouldn't use fund balance.
The only thing, just for us to keep in mind with that, is, as I mentioned, there's that tsunami when ARPA's gone. So we're gonna be trying to tackle that as well as this. So we'll need to just make sure that there's gonna be that capacity. But one of the things that I know that I've talked about with our team, and I've talked about with some of you, is just that, you know, the Community Enhancement Fund, and I know that has been a source of conversation over the last couple of budget cycles. And one of the things for me is I feel like it's also because, yes, number one, whether it's a tax or whether it's a fee, it's still money that our residents pay for. But I think the hard part with it is being able to justify if you're seeing things not look as manicured and well-kept as they could be. And so one of the things that we're working on as a staff that I want to make sure that I inform the council and the community is really being hyper-focused on our beautification efforts. And so that's one thing that I've asked Mr. Meagle and Mr. Gonzalez to be very involved in, is looking to make sure, how can we make sure that we're maintaining, you know, our rights of way and things like that we own. You know, designing pattern books and things like that look at our landscaping and the types of plantings that we put so there's more uniformity, but also stuff that we can maintain better. And so there's going to be a lot of focus on that, and just want y'all to know, because I want y'all to be able to go to the community and say, these are the kinds of things that this helps to pay for. And it's really hard to justify, I know, when you go and you see things look overgrown and things don't look as well kept as they should. So this is something that I feel like we can do a lot better on, and our team is really gonna be hyper-focused on looking at how we can make the community be that sense of pride, not only for visitors that are coming to visit, but for people who live here every day to be able to feel that sense of pride and community that they need to when they look at how well we try to keep our city looking.
I think that's fantastic, and thank you for maintaining our gateways and things like that. The only concern I have, and I did bring this up with Mr. Carr the other day when we ran into each other, things like where you pay the electricity, City Hall, the outside of it, our animal shelter. those are also things that I'd like to maintain, that we keep focus on, that those are also ways the city, our citizens look at us. If we have a nasty area, it just really shows that we don't care. So thank you. And I've seen a huge improvement over the last 4 years by itself over ownership of our city. So thank you.
We're trying, I mean, and we have an amazing team that really works together, and again, they have a passion for trying to make things look good, but everybody has different ideas about what that looks like, so that's why we want to get some uniformity, so that we can make sure that, you know, that those things are done in a way that does make us put our best foot forward. And you're exactly right, we've got to take care of our stuff to make sure that then that sets the standard, hopefully, for private property owners, because some things we don't control with that. But hopefully, if we have some standards and we show we take care of our stuff very well, then we can work with private property owners to make sure that they're doing that with contractors who are working within our city to try to make sure that they keep their job sites and things looking as best as possible too, under the circumstances. So just wanted y'all to know that that is a hyper focus that we're doing, and you'll see that here in terms of the deliverables that we're hoping to be able to deliver on when it comes to how these funds are utilized.
I wish all our light fixtures on the Wonder World overpass matched. There were about 6 of them that were missing for about 2 or 3 years because they fell off, and the ones that TxDOT put up there that aren't made anymore. So we've got some substitutes that aren't very close, and now I've noticed, I don't know if it's one of them or one of the old ones, there's another one they just fall off. The pole's there and they just fall off, they're gone. And I bet those things are really expensive too. But that was part of my deal with the community enhancement fee, was to be able to have a fund, and I say this every year, of an allocated amount of money that's not assigned, so that when things like that happen, we can fix them. But that one's gonna be a huge project, so I don't think it's gonna fit out of community enhancement funds. I didn't see any decision points on this one.
There isn't, Mayor.
Okay, good, then I didn't miss anything.
We're not asking for rate increase, we're not asking for any of that kind of stuff, so.
Well, at least this is a predictable one. Okay.
Okay, so that takes us to the last section, and that's our enterprise funds. It has a total of 6 funds, the 4 utility funds, the airport, and transit. Begin with just to touch on something that we actually discussed during visioning, and that is the utility debt management plan. This is especially important for the electric and water wastewater and the bond rating that we have for both of those utilities. The first is having a strong working capital cash on hand, which is a fund balance. And we currently have 90 days, which is strong, and that should be the minimum amount that we keep there. We've actually had some discussions internally on moving that up possibly to 120 days. The water wastewater fund is already there. The electric is a little ways off, but that's just some internal discussions that we've had that would be viewed favorably by the rating agencies. Another important thing is what's called a debt service coverage ratio. And a way to look at this is if you think about it in terms of your home expenses, is when you take all your revenue from your paycheck that you get each month, and you pay all of your monthly expenses like your utilities, your groceries, what you have remaining after you pay all of those, the bank would want to make sure that you could cover, say, your mortgage payment one whole time, plus at least 20% of that payment again. And that gives some reassurance to the bank that if you have some bills come up that you weren't thinking about or planning
Tree
for.
falls on your house.
I'm sorry, yeah, or something like that happens, then you'll be able to still repay your loan. And that's what this debt service coverage ratio does. It gives bondholders and rating agencies confidence that if some unplanned expenses come up, the city will still be able to make its debt service payments. So the legal requirement, if the city issues a revenue bond, the legal requirement, it will be 1.2 to 1.3. So that means we'll be able to cover all of our debt once, and then 20% to 30% of that total amount again. What is considered to be a healthy coverage is 1.4 to 1.5, and anything above 1.5 is considered strong. Another important thing to note is that trends are more important than a snapshot of a point in time. So a 1.5 at a point in time is healthy, not strong. A 1.5 that's maintained over a long period of time, say like over a 10-year period of time, demonstrates that the city is effectively managing operations, and that is viewed as strong. And just another part is designating some pay-as-you-go funding or some cash funding for some capital projects and capital improvement projects, so that we're not completely reliant on debt issue for capital projects.
So where do we stand?
We're getting ready to go into that right now with each one of these funds.
Okay.
So with our electric utility fund, you'll see that we're estimating in fiscal year 2024 that we're going to begin with a 17 million fund balance, use some fund balance, and finish with around a $14 million fund balance. For the revenues next year, there is an assumed increase for the electric utility fund. And I need to preface that this is just an internal assumption, and it's just tentative. The Citizens Utility Advisory Board will actually make the final determination and recommendation to City Council on what increase the electric and water wastewater fund should have. This is just to provide a ballpark of what we're looking at right now and what it would take to cover what the current operating expenses are, as well as hit those targets that the bond rating agencies look at. For instance, maintaining at least a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio. So the total revenues and expenses do equal at 80.6 million. So we would finish at 14 million, and that's about 65 days of cash on hand. The budget policy says that we're going to work towards a 90. 90-day cash on hand is 19.6 million. So we're about $5 million short of being at the 90. And a couple things to point out when I mentioned that for the debt service that we needed to maintain a minimum of the 1.2. The total debt service in this fund is $7.4 million. So 1.2 would be $8.9 million. That's what the rating agencies would want to see us be able to have free and clear after we pay all of our operating expenses, which those are the personnel and operating, the first two columns. That's, I'm sorry, I should have explained that. When you look at our total revenue, the $80 million, and you subtract the personnel and the operating, which is $70 million, the rating agencies would want to see that we would have about the $8.9 million remaining so that we can cover our debt 1.2 times. That's what that debt service coverage ratio is.
They want to see 8.9 where on this?
Just that
Bunch
we
of
are
numbers.
able to cover debt service, which is the 7.4, and then another 20% of it, which gets you to the 8.9. The 8.9 isn't on the screen anywhere. I was just explaining how where the 1.2 comes into play.
No, I get that the 8.9 is there, but which column and which row are we talking about that we need to beat the 8.9?
It would be the debt service row and on the fiscal year 25 column. So where you see that 7.4.
Okay. That's what I needed to know.
Yes. And so the one-time expenses would be $2 million. So we would not, we're not proposing to use any fund balance in fiscal year 25.
But when we look at it, we're not even at the 1.2, is what you're saying.
Yes, we are at the 1.2. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain because I didn't do a very good job. So The way that the rating agencies will look at it is if you look at our total revenues, the $80.6 million. And then you subtract the personnel from it and the
Yeah.
operating from it, which is roughly about $70 million. What is remaining is $10 million. And what they want to see remaining is the 8.9.
Okay, but that's what I had asked you, and you said it was we were comparing to the debt service line of 7.4 million.
Yeah,
It wasn't that.
it is not, no,
Okay,
yes.
all right.
All right, so, sorry for the confusion, but, and under this scenario, with these assumptions that we've made, we would be meeting that 1.2.
Okay.
And John, that 1.2 is the legal minimum requirement?
Yes,
Okay, and what was the healthy
1.5.
recommended again?
yeah,
Oh, 1.3, and then the really good was 1.5.
yeah, anything above 1.5 is considered healthy.
It's just since we talked about the importance of doing that, I'm just trying to find it on one of these screens as to where we actually are. And that's what I couldn't find.
Okay.
That's why I asked if we were gonna get there. Okay, thank you.
So the underlying assumptions that get us there, and again, this is tentative because the QAB has not reviewed this and they make the final recommendation to council, is that it would take a 5.5% effective rate adjustment in order to produce enough revenue to cover the operational expenses and give us that minimum legal debt service coverage ratio. And the other revenue sources are minimal within the electric fund. You have transfers that are 3%. These transfers are the utility billing department is paid from the electric fund, and the other enterprise funds contribute a portion of that cost to the electric fund. And then all other revenue sources make up 5% of the revenue in the fund. This is a look at the major increases in the electric fund. The personnel increases, you have the 3% as well as the longevity. There's one new position included in the electric fund. The operating costs, the biggest cost in the electric fund are the power costs. And the power cost for fuel is estimated to go up by 3.2 million, and the transmission cost 785,000. There are 4 requests for large equipment of $612,000 and $1.5 million of cash money that would go towards the capital improvement plan. We also have the debt service for the fiscal year 24 capital improvement plan that will come online and need to be paid next year. That's $441,000. And the way the decision points are set up for these utility funds is we go through all of them, and it'll be at the end.
That's fine.
Okay. The next fund is the water wastewater utility fund. The same underlying assumptions that we covered for electric would work here as it relates to what the bond rating agencies are looking for. In the water wastewater fund, we're estimating to finish with a $23 million fund balance. And the revenues and expenses for fiscal year 25 equal, so we're not proposing to use any fund balance. So we would finish with that $23 million fund balance, which is 123 days of cash on hand. The fund balance requirement for this fund is 90 days. So if we were to entertain increasing to that 120-day mark, this fund would already have the cash on hand to do so. I did just want to point out, under debt service for this fund, the $21 million also includes the ARWA debt. That includes both city-issued debt and ARWA debt. So in order to cover the operating expenses as well as meet that minimum 1.2 ratio that we discussed with the electric fund, it would take a 3.7% rate adjustment in the water wastewater fund. That's what we're estimating right now tentatively. The water wastewater services revenue make up the bulk of revenue in this fund, as you can see, 98%. All the other revenues combined only make up 2%. The major increases in the water wastewater fund, you have the personnel from the 3% increase in the longevity. On the operating side, the Alliance Regional Water Authority contract will increase by $250,000. The surface water treatment plant agreement by $280,000, and the wastewater treatment plant contract is estimated to increase by $357,000. Just noting that the wastewater treatment plant contract is in the process of being bid out. That contract ends in September of 2025. There are some one-time expenses. You can see there's 13 new requests for large equipment and infrastructure that total $788,000, and an estimated $2.9 million that would be set aside for the capital improvement plan.
Cash or debt?
That's cash, ma'am. The next is the stormwater utility fund. We're estimating to finish fiscal year 2024 with $3.1 million as a fund balance. The revenues and expenses equal one another, so we're not proposing to use any fund balance in '25. You see the increase in revenues from fiscal year '24 to '25. That is not from a proposed rate adjustment. That is just from the estimated growth in accounts. And that has all been made possible really from using the general fund's capacity to cover the stormwater capital improvement projects. We've done that now for fiscal year '23 and '24, and the budget policy says to do it again in fiscal year 2025. The underlying assumptions I covered on the previous slide. There is no assumed rate adjustment needed, and it's just an increase from revenue growth. The major cost drivers in this personnel, the personnel increase is the 3% increase. This is just a list of all of the utility fund supplemental requests, the ones that were actually included within the preliminary budget we went over when we covered the fund. That brings us to Resource Recovery Fund. We're estimating to finish fiscal year '24 at $2.9 million. And the revenues for '24, you see the increase there. That is not from an assumed rate adjustment in the Resource Recovery Fund. We are forecasting that it will not require a rate adjustment. There is a decision point on that we'll talk about in a little bit, though. So the revenues are estimated to be $8.1 million and expenses $7.9. The budget considerations for this fund on the revenue side, the solid waste collection make up 68%, the recycling is 28%, and all other revenue sources is only 4%. Mentioned that the increase is just from growth. There is the dollar for the mattress removal program. That is also factored into the revenues.
Is that $1 per customer?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay.
The decision point that we'll talk about when we get to the enterprise fund decision point is whether council would want to do like for instance, a 1% increase now to forego a larger increase down the road. And that is because the contracts that we'll actually talk about on the next slide, the solid waste residential contract, that has a 3% inflator every year in it. And the Green Guy contract also has a 3% increase. That $451,000 that you see there, $411,000 of that is from that mattress program. That's what that dollar is going to go to cover. So the decision point is do we go ahead and increase by 1% now? So next year, maybe we don't have to increase 3%, because that's kind of been the trend with this fund, is a 3% increase. Moving on to the airport fund. We are estimating to finish with about a $95,000 fund balance in airport. For fiscal year '25, revenues are estimated to go up slightly to $873,000, and expenses will go up as well to $881,000. The contract services is with the Texas Aviation Partners. That agreement with them calls for a 2% increase in their agreement, so that's the reason for the increase there. And the operating is the incentive, the revenue incentive payment to them if our revenues increase by a certain amount. There's an incentive built in that they will receive. So we're estimating to finish fiscal year '25 with an $86,000 fund balance. So the big increases in airport for revenue is the commercial land facilities and rent. It will increase by $33,000. $27,000 of that is from the fire training facility rent. And we already touched on the cost drivers for the airport, the annual 2% increase for the operational contract, as well as the estimated incentive for if they increase the airport's revenue. And the final fund is the transit fund. We are, just to break down the different revenue sources that you're looking at in the transit fund, the operating revenue is federal and state transit funds. The other revenue, that's the general fund contribution that we make into the transit fund. And then you have the CARES and ARP, which are also federal grant dollars that we've been able to use over the past couple years to help fund the operation. In fiscal year '24, we're estimating that we're going to finish with $906,000 of a fund balance, and that the revenues will be $2.85 million, expenses will be $2.84 million. We'll finish with about $916,000, which is 116 days cash on hand. The budget policy recommended to explore the fund balance requirement for 60 days, so we would be at that level. Budget considerations associated with the transit fund. On the cost driver side, we have the 3% increase in personnel costs. And this kind of plays into the tsunami that Ms. Reyes has spoke about a couple times this evening. The general fund's contribution has been lower over the past couple of years because we've been able to use CARES and ARP funding. The ARP funding will end at the end of fiscal year '25 and CARES at the end of fiscal year '26. So the general fund's contribution will likely increase by around $300,000 in fiscal year '27. So that's one of the long-term items that we're tracking right now that the general fund is going to have to pick up down the road. And that brings us to the decision points.
Go ahead.
The Utility Advisory Board, have they made recommendations yet? Okay.
Not yet.
They will look at this and then they will make recommendations. John's presentation, Mr. Locke's presentation is strictly just from looking at, the best practices when it comes to what bond rating looks like when it looks for the times coverage and all that. But the QAB will definitely look at this and provide recommendations to the council in regard to what they believe.
And there's some the ERCOT last week, a week before, was saying that electricity demands in Texas are going to be nearly double by 2030. Some really shocking numbers, and I imagine that's going to be higher utility rates to meet those demands. But QAB is looking into it, and they're going to start making recommendations and how it's going to affect our bottom line.
Yeah, I'm not sure why this is a question, because that's why we have QAB and it's what we do. So I guess the question is, do we want to keep doing what we've always done, which is we point people to QAB and they look at it and then they provide us a recommendation and then we do what we feel we need to do. So are y'all good with that?
I think it's a good process.
for Mr. Gleason, that we'll continue,
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, Mayor.
okay. Scarza?
Sure, but I'm just gonna name that I cannot in good conscience support any proposals, to increase fees or utility rates for our neighbors until I can confidently assure them that the social service programs that we fund, especially those intended to support utility payments, have been thoroughly reviewed and adjusted to prioritize our most vulnerable residents. So that is gonna stand regardless of what the committee says.
Noted. What is our ratio on water, wastewater? You mentioned it was 1.2 for electric.
It would be 1.2 under the assumptions provided for fiscal year '25.
Okay. So we're good with the first, which includes those next two. And so, council, do we want to do a 1% rate increase in resource recovery, or wait and do a bigger increase in a future year?
So we don't have.
Like the small
Yeah.
stair step, which we didn't do that at one point, and then we really whooped up on people with a huge rate increase. You're good with that, Mr. Mendoza? I'm looking for, Mr. Gleason, I see you had your hand up. Was that just for the yes? Okay. Mr. Mendoza, you had your
Yes, it
hand
was,
up.
Mayor, just for the yes.
Okay, great. You had your hand up. Did you need a question answered before we ask? Now's the time.
Thank you. Okay, so I see here, personnel, this is the one that stood out to me big time is, out of all the departments we've talked about, 215,000 for that 3% increase. How many employees are getting that increase, in that department? How many do we have there? I ever heard by chance?
A lot?
I don't know offhand, and we can find out, unless Mr. York knows offhand.
About 75 people. And these alliance contracts, the surface water, wastewater, could I get some description on that? I mean, I know why we have to have contracts there, but that's such a huge increase. Is it they're increasing the staff we have here, or is it, did they explain why we're increasing so much?
I believe it's just contractual, isn't, just the contractual increases.
Just the increase per.
Just within the contract, it allows for it to increase by a certain amount each year to allow for inflation.
Wow.
That's weird.
That's a huge increase. Just to note, I'm definitely uncomfortable with that part. That's just a huge increase for contracts. It's like paying extra for internet service when it just doesn't. Okay, thank you for explaining it. That's what I had.
But you're gonna get water. Okay, I'm not following what page your question came from, but that's okay. I need to finish going around the table on the 1% on resource recovery.
I'm okay with that.
I'm writing this down. Ms. Garza?
No.
Same comments as before?
Yes.
Got it. I don't see Mr. Scott on. Next one, approve supplemental request in enterprise funds based on capacity from rate models and QAB recommended rate adjustments. What do we mean by supplemental requests?
Those are those requests that are new for a new position or a new piece of equipment.
So basically, it's just saying that whenever the QAB looks at the overall things that are going to be funded, whether it's equipment, positions, or whatever, they're going to take all that into consideration in making their recommendation to you as council in regard to what the rates, if there's going to need to be an increase or those kinds of things. So it's,
This is asking approve. I'm good at look at whenever it comes to us, and at that point, we'll have the data that we need to approve or not approve. This is kind of like signing a blank check.
Yeah,
which a lot of
and
this
so,
is,
and
but.
that's not the intent with it. It's
Yeah, I
really
didn't think
more
so.
about making sure that whatever we have capacity to do within whatever the recommended rate adjustments would be of CUAB.
Right, and we said that well, that only addressed rate, and this is talking about the extras. Okay, so I'll go around the table again. So we'll look at what QAB sends to us, to do additional positions. I think there were some, $612,000 in some equipment, capital improvements plan. We approved that when we approved the plan, so some of that I think is already kind of approved. But are y'all good with these extra things? I see Mr. Prather, yes. Mr. Mendoza, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Gleason's got a thumbs up, thank you. Ms. Garza, ditto? Oh, just a no, okay, got it. Okay. Other direction for staff? If y'all are interested, I ask that that document that we have, the history of rate increases, it's on the message board on this item. Or if you want one before you leave tonight, I'll print you another one. I've got it pulled up. So, anything else on enterprise funds?
Mayor, I didn't catch
What'd I
it for
miss?
the 1% rate adjustment for resource recovery.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, we were good with that.
We were good, okay,
The majority was good with that. I'll put it that way.
thank you.
Okay, yes. Okay. Anything else on this part?
No, ma'am.
Have we come to the end of the presentation?
We have, I believe, one slide, and that's next steps.
Okay.
So, as we discussed at the beginning, that the budget will be submitted to City Council and on August 20th, and on that same day, Council will set the maximum proposed tax rate for fiscal year '25. There's still multiple opportunities for community input. We have the Neighborhood Commission presentation that'll happen the day after that the budget is submitted to City Council. And then there's 4 public hearings, 2 on September 3rd and 2 on September 17th, where citizens can comment on the tax rate as well as the budget. And then council will finally consider the budget and the tax rate adoption at the September 17th meeting. That concludes the presentation.
Okay. Council, one last time for thoughts? Mr. Gleason? All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd just like to thank staff, thank Mr. Locke. I know this is a tough process. There's a lot to discuss here, and I just like to thank for all the efforts they put in the past, because we're in the situation that we are because of their past successes. So I just want to thank them all, and I appreciate the conversation with my colleagues.
And I want to thank you all, everyone who has worked really hard. It appears that departments have really sharpened their pencils. Thank you for giving up some this year that budgeted money you thought you had and the income wasn't there, and so you've had to do without some things that you had expected to do. I know that's a little different than giving up something for a future budget, because you can kind of plan for that. So thank you, thanks to everyone, because I know this budget thing is not easy. And I'm glad that I don't have to do the front end part of this, because that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? So anyway, thank you to everyone who goes through and deals with the numbers and the dollars. And with that, we're adjourned at 9:02. Oh, there was no one signed up for Q&A.